There are forces in the universe that even the chaos gods fear to acknowledge. Entities so fundamentally wrong, so impossibly contradictory to the laws of reality, that their very existence sends ripples of confusion through the warp itself. In the 41st millennium, where gods feast on emotion and demons are born from nightmares, there exists a hierarchy of power that has remained unchallenged for 10,000 years. The Emperor sits on his golden throne, the Chaos Gods reign in the warp, and between them, endless war consumes trillions of souls. But today's story is about the day something entered this brutal equation that had no place in its logic. Something that would make even demons question the fundamental nature of power itself. If you crave more tales from the dark millennium, where the impossible becomes inevitable, join the ranks of the faithful and subscribe now. The Emperor shields our cause, and you'll want to witness every moment of this cosmic collision that rewrites the rules of reality. The warp storm above Cadia screamed with colors that had no names in any human language. This was the 999th year of the 41st millennium, and Abaddon the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade had torn the fabric of reality into ribbons of pure madness. The Eye of Terror, that ancient wound in space where the warp bled into real space, had finally erupted with the full fury of 10 millennia of hatred. Chaos Space Marines in profane armor stormed the trenches. Demon engines the size of hab blocks crushed bunkers beneath clawed feet, and above it all, the gods themselves watched with hungry anticipation as their greatest champion prepared to shatter the Imperium's most legendary fortress world. Commissar Helena Vrost stood atop the obsidian ramparts of Kassergallen, her bolt pistol warm in her hand from hours of constant firing. The weapon's machine spirit hummed with righteous fury, having claimed the lives of 17 heretics and 2 lesser demons in the last hour alone. Around her, the 8th Cadian Regiment, the Devil's Own, held their positions with the stubborn professionalism that had made their world the Imperium's standard for military excellence. These were soldiers born and bred for war, children who learned to field strip lasguns before they could read, citizens who knew that Cadia stood between humanity and damnation. "Sector 9 holding!" Sergeant Chorus's voice crackled through the vox bead in her ear, distorted by the electromagnetic screaming of nearby warp tiers. "Ammunition at 40%. We can hold for another 3 hours, Emperor willing." Helena swept her magnoculars across the killing field beyond the trenches. The landscape of Cadia had been transformed into something from mankind's darkest myths. Craters the size of city blocks steamed with unnatural heat. The remains of a chaos titan lay across what had once been a primary highway, its corrupted hull still twitching with demonic pseudo-life. Artillery thundered from the bastions behind her in a rhythm that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. The bass drum pounding of earth-shaker cannons, the shrieking whistle of shells, the crump of explosions that briefly illuminated the perpetual twilight in shades of orange and red. The air carried the distinctive stink of war in the 41st millennium. Promethium exhaust from idling Chimera APCs, the sharp ozone tang of sustained lasgun fire, scorched flesh both human and otherwise, and underneath it all, that sickly sweet corruption that preceded demonic manifestation. It was a smell every Cadian learned to recognize by their 5th birthday, the smell of the enemy. "Contact, Section 9-7. Chorus's voice had changed, losing its professional calm for something Helena had never heard from the 20-year veteran: uncertainty bordering on confusion. "Warp tear expanding, massive energy readings, we're registering. Throne's sake, the Auspex isn't making any sense." Helena snapped her magnoculars toward the coordinates, her other hand instinctively checking the sanctified purity seals on her uniform. Warp rifts, she understood. She'd fought through 17 years of demon incursions, chaos cult uprisings, and reality-bending horrors that would drive lesser soldiers to madness. this was different. The tier forming 300 meters beyond the trenches pulsed with energies that seemed almost confused. Instead of the usual cacophony of rage, despair, excess, or ambition that marked the four Chaos Gods' influence, this rift emanated something unprecedented: uncertainty, hesitation. As if the warp itself, that realm of infinite malice and hunger, didn't know what it was birthing into the material universe. Lightning arced between dimensions in impossible geometries that hurt to perceive directly. Space folded like parchment being crumpled by an angry god, creating angles that couldn't exist in three-dimensional reality. The warp screamed through the tear, not with triumph or hunger, but with what almost sounded like confusion. Around her, seasoned Cadian soldiers, men and women who'd stared down bloodletters and laughed, took involuntary steps backward, and then, with a sound like reality itself sighing in exhausted resignation, something stepped through. A man. Just a man. He was completely bald, his head reflecting the hellish light of Cadia's burning sky like a polished dome. He wore what appeared to be a yellow jumpsuit. Not armor, not robes, not any kind of protective gear that made sense on a battlefield where the air itself could flay flesh from bone. A white cape hung from his shoulders, fluttering in winds that didn't exist in any physical sense. His face held an expression of such profound, bone-deep boredom that Helena actually lowered her magnoculars to clean the lenses, certain she was experiencing equipment malfunction. Behind him, the warp tear didn't explode with demons or corrupt the ground with its touch. It simply sealed shut with a wet, sucking sound, as if the Imperium itself was eager, perhaps even relieved, to be rid of whatever had just emerged. The bald man looked around at the apocalyptic hellscape of Cadia with the mild interest someone might show at a particularly unimpressive street market. His gaze swept over demon blood steaming on cratered ground, the corpses of cultists heaped in trenches, the sky literally bleeding reality into the warp, and entire sections of the city fortress burning with warp fire. And he scratched his head like he'd taken a wrong turn on his way to buy groceries. "Target acquired," Helena heard herself say into the Vox, though every instinct screamed that this was wrong. The figure registered as human on their Auspex scanners, perfectly, mundanely human. The readings were so baseline, so completely unremarkable that they seemed like a technical error. No warp signature, no psychic resonance, not even the tiny spark that marked a normal human soul's interaction with the Imperium. Just nothing. An absence shaped like a man in a yellow suit. The 8th Cadian Regiment had fought through scenarios that would break the sanity of lesser Imperial Guard units. They'd held trenches against Kornate berserkers who felt no pain. They'd repelled Nurgle plague-bearers whose very presence turned the air into poison. They'd even survived a night assault from a Slaaneshi warband that had used sonic weapons to turn men's own nervous systems against them. But in all their years of service to the Emperor, they had never encountered anything quite like this moment of collective confusion. "Commissar?" Sergeant Chorus's voice held a question that military protocol couldn't quite frame. Rules of engagement. Helena kept her magnoculars trained on the bald man, watching as he patted down his yellow suit with the methodical patience of someone checking for their wallet. The cape, that ridiculous white cape, continued to billow dramatically despite the fact that the toxic wind had died down to almost nothing in this section of the battlefield. It was as if reality itself was trying to make him look heroic, even though nothing about his demeanor suggested he cared one way or another. "Hold fire," Helena commanded, surprising herself with the order. "But maintain target lock. All weapons ready." Around her position, she heard the distinctive click-whir of hotshot lasguns being switched to maximum power setting. The 8th Cadian Special Weapons teams adjusted their plasma guns, the blue-white glow of their ready indicators casting eerie shadows across the ramparts. In the trenches below, A Lascanon team swiveled their massive weapon to track the figure, its targeting cogitator chirping softly as it calculated firing solutions for something that registered as approximately 170 centimeters tall and weighing perhaps 70 kilograms. Threat assessment: negligible. Every instrument, every auspex, every sacred machine spirit in their arsenal reported the same impossible conclusion. This was an unarmed, unarmored human male of unremarkable physical characteristics standing in the middle of the most dangerous war zone in the galaxy, and he posed approximately zero tactical threat. Helena's instincts, honed through 17 years of survival in the Imperial Guard, screamed the opposite. The bald man finished his pocket inspection, apparently finding nothing, and looked up at the sky. Helena followed his gaze and felt her blood ice over. Descending through the smoke-choked atmosphere were shapes that made hardened veterans reach for their prayer beads. Greater demons. Not the lesser warp spawn that served as cannon fodder in demonic incursions, but the true embodiments of the Chaos God's will. A lord of change circled on wings of impossible color, its 9 eyes fixed on the yellow-suited figure below. Bloodthirsters of Khorne roared challenges that shattered windows 3 kilometers away. A great unclean one oozed through the upper atmosphere, leaving a trail of corruption that turned clouds into diseased flesh. The bald man watched them approach with an expression that could only be described as mild disappointment. Helena could almost read his thoughts in that deadpan face. Really, this is what passes for threats in this dimension. "In the name of the Emperor," Helena whispered, making the sign of the aquila across her chest. "What are you?" As if hearing her question across 300 meters of war-torn battlefield, the bald man turned to look directly at her position. For just a moment, their eyes met through her magnoculars, and Helena felt something profoundly unsettling. Not the soul-crushing dread of chaos corruption. Not the existential horror of witnessing demonic manifestation. Something simpler and somehow more disturbing, complete and total apathy. This being looked at her, at the burning fortress world, at the literal apocalypse unfolding around them, and felt nothing. Then he raised one hand in what might have been a casual wave. "Throne, preserve us," Chorus muttered over the vox. Is he being friendly?" Before Helena could respond, reality itself seemed to hold its breath. In the warp, that churning sea of emotion and nightmare that existed beneath the skin of the material universe, 4 impossibly vast intelligences turned their full attention to the anomaly standing on Cadia's surface. Khorne, the blood god, ceased his eternal counting of skulls. Tzeentch, the architect of fate, paused in weaving his infinite plots. Nurgle, the lord of decay, looked up from his cauldron of plagues. Slaanesh, the prince of pleasure, stopped mid-indulgence. The chaos gods stared at something that should not exist. In their realm, everything had a reflection. Every human emotion fed them power. Fear strengthened them, rage sustained them. Hope, despair, ambition, resignation, all of it flowed into the warp and became sustenance for the eternal pantheon of corruption. They saw the souls of every living thing in the galaxy as candle flames in an infinite darkness, each one burning with the potential for corruption. But this bald man in a yellow suit cast no light. He had no warp presence, no soul signature, no emotional resonance. It wasn't that he was somehow shielded or protected. The warp could eventually corrupt even the most powerful psyker's defenses. It was that he fundamentally did not interact with their realm at all. He existed in the material universe as if the warp simply didn't apply to him. Khorne's rage found no purchase. Tzeentch's schemes slid off like water from oil. Nurgle's entropy couldn't touch him. Slaanesh's temptations went unnoticed. He was a void, a blank spot in reality where a person should be. Not a blank or a null. those soulless humans whose presence actively suppressed the warp. Those beings created a painful absence, a sucking wound in the Imperium. This was different. This was as if he existed in a completely separate reality that just happened to occupy the same physical space, and the warp couldn't even recognize him enough to hate him. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Chaos Gods felt something approaching genuine concern. Back on Cadia's surface, the bald man seemed to come to some kind of decision. He looked at the descending greater demons, then at the burning fortress world around him, then at his clenched fist. He appeared to be having an internal debate about something, his expression cycling through mild interest, faint disappointment, and finally settling on resigned boredom. Then he spoke, his voice carrying across the battlefield with unnatural clarity despite the thunder of artillery and the screaming of demons. "Is this supposed to be impressive?" The words were in flawless low Gothic, though his accent suggested he'd learned the language approximately 30 seconds ago by hearing it once. He sounded genuinely curious, as if asking whether the apocalyptic demon invasion was meant to be entertainment or just background noise. Helena's bolt pistol suddenly felt very inadequate in her hand. "All units," she said slowly into the vox, her training taking over even as her mind struggled to process what she was witnessing. "Defensive positions. Whatever happens next, just be ready." Above, a bloodthirster of Khorne, a demon prince of such power that its true name could drive mortals mad, let out a roar that shattered the remaining windows in Qasr Galan. It raised its axe, a weapon that had cleaved through Imperial knights and dreadnoughts, and dove toward the bald man with speed that turned it into a crimson blur. The bald man watched it come with the same expression someone might reserve for a particularly slow-moving fly. And then, almost lazily, he raised his fist. The bloodthirster's descent was a thing of terrible beauty, if beauty could be found in pure, distilled violence. Its wings, massive pinions of brass and burning hatred, cut through the smoke-filled air with a sound like screaming metal. The demon stood nearly 15 meters tall, its crimson flesh rippling with muscles that defied biological logic. In one massive fist, it gripped an axe forged in the heart of Khorne's brass citadel, a weapon that had tasted the blood of saints and heroes across 10 millennia of slaughter. Each of its horns was inscribed with the names of the 888 champions it had personally slain in single combat. This was no mere lesser demon. This was Carvarok, the Skullrender, a demon prince whose reputation preceded it across a dozen sectors. It had been present at the fall of Macaria. It had led the assault on St. Marguerite's shrine world, personally beheading the living saint before her faithful followers. Entire chapters of Space Marines had been decimated trying to banish it back to the warp, and now it fell upon this strange bald man, like the wrath of an angry god made manifest. The impact should have created a crater. The shockwave should have leveled everything within 50 meters. The demon's axe, swung with enough force to split a land raider in half, came down in an arc that left a trail of burning reality in its wake. Saitama looked up at the descending horror with an expression of faint recognition, like someone remembering they'd left the stove on at home. His fist, still raised in that almost lazy gesture, didn't glow with power. No energy discharged from it. No psychic flames wreathed his arm. No force field shimmered into existence. He was just a bald man in a yellow suit with his fist extended upward, looking mildly inconvenienced by the 15-meter demon prince trying to bisect him. The axe met his fist. What happened next would be argued about in Imperial archives for centuries to come, assuming anyone could accurately describe it. The bloodthirster's axe, that artifact of corruption that had ended countless lives, simply stopped. Not against a force field, not deflected by armor or psychic barriers. It stopped as if it had struck something infinitely immovable. as if the very concept of forward momentum ceased to exist the moment it touched Saitama's unprotected knuckles. For one frozen heartbeat, everything on the battlefield paused. Cadians mid-reload, artillery crews mid-calculation. Even the greater demons circling above seemed to hang in the air, witnesses to something that shouldn't be possible. Then the axe shattered. Not broke, not cracked, shattered. The demon-forged weapon exploded into fragments of impossible metal that evaporated into warp stuff before they could hit the ground. The bloodthirster's arm, still gripping the axe's handle, disintegrated up to the shoulder in a wave of unmaking that looked almost casual. Carvarok, the skull render, had time for one confused bellow, a sound that mixed rage with something the demon had never felt before. Surprise. Then Saitama's fist moved forward approximately 3 centimeters. The punch wasn't dramatic. There was no wind-up, no battle cry, no channeling of visible power. It was the kind of punch someone might throw to test if a wall was solid. But when that fist connected with the bloodthirster's chest, reality itself seemed to briefly forget how physics worked. The demon exploded, not in the gradual unraveling that happened when demons were banished back to the warp, not in the slow dissolution of unholy matter returning to the Imperium. Carvarok, the skull render, a being of such power that it required the combined might of a Grey Knight's strike force to even slow down, simply ceased to exist in an expanding sphere of former demon that atomized into nothing before it could splatter across the battlefield. The shockwave was almost an afterthought. It rolled across the cratered landscape like a physical wall, kicking up dust and debris, causing every Cadian within 300 meters to instinctively duck. The sound came a split second later, a thunderclap that echoed off the fortress walls and kept echoing, bouncing between the hab blocks and defense towers, like the universe's confused attempt to acknowledge what had just occurred. Silence fell across this section of the battlefield. Artillery continued to thunder in distant sectors, but here, in the immediate vicinity of what should have been an epic demon battle, there was only shocked quiet. Saitama lowered his fist and examined his glove. A small scuff mark marred the white fabric where the demon's axe had made contact. He rubbed at it with his thumb, his expression shifting from boredom to mild annoyance. "Damn," he muttered, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. This suit was brand new, and on the ramparts of Casa Galan, Helena Vrost stood frozen, her bolt pistol hanging forgotten in her hand. Around her, the 8th Cadian Regiment, soldiers who prided themselves on maintaining composure under any circumstance, simply stared. These were men and women who'd been trained since childhood to respond to any combat situation with disciplined efficiency. They had contingency protocols for demon invasions, Xenos attacks, heretic uprisings, and even the remote possibility of friendly Astartes going renegade. There was no protocol for unarmored civilian destroys greater demon with casual punch. "Did?" Sergeant Corus's voice cracked slightly over the vox. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Did that just happen?" Helena's hand moved automatically to the purity seals on her uniform, fingers touching each one in the ritual sequence that was supposed to ward against corruption and madness. The seals were intact. The blessed wax was warm, but not melting. She wasn't experiencing warp-induced hallucination. The demon detector on her belt, a sanctified device that screamed in the presence of Imperium taint, was quiet except for the normal background radiation of the Eye of Terror's proximity. This was real. Somehow, impossibly, this was real. In the warp, the 4 Chaos Gods recoiled. The death of a greater demon always sent ripples through the Imperium, the sudden severing of a connection between their realm and reality, a loss of power and presence that took centuries to recover. But this was different. Carvarok hadn't been banished. It hadn't been sent screaming back to the warp to slowly regenerate its form. It had been deleted, erased. Its essence hadn't returned to feed back into Khorne's domain. It was just gone, as if it had never existed at all. Khorne rose from his throne of brass and skulls, his attention now fully focused on the material realm. The other gods watched with varying degrees of interest and alarm. Something existed in the galaxy that could permanently destroy their servants. Something that the warp couldn't touch, couldn't corrupt, couldn't even properly perceive. Something that had just casually obliterated one of Khorne's favored champions while complaining about a stain on his clothing. Back on Cadia, Saitama finished examining the scuff mark on his glove and looked up at the other greater demons still circling overhead. The Lord of Change, the Great Unclean One, and 3 more bloodthirsters that had been descending to join the fight. They had all stopped, hovering in place with what could only be described as uncertainty. Saitama sighed, a sound of profound disappointment that somehow carried across the entire battlefield. "Oh," he said, cracking his knuckles with a series of pops that sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. "Who's next?" In the Imperium, where thought and reality were one and the same, the Chaos Gods held council for the first time in 10,000 years. Not since the Emperor had been entombed upon the Golden Throne had they felt the need to coordinate their efforts. They were rivals, eternal enemies whose very natures opposed one another. Khorne's rage against Slanesh's excess, Tzeentch's schemes undone by Nurgle's entropy. They warred against each other as much as they warred against reality itself. But now, staring at this void shaped like a man, they recognized something that transcended their eternal conflicts, a genuine threat. Khorne's voice was the sound of a billion battles happening simultaneously, the crash of axes on shields multiplied into infinity. "What is it?" Tzeentch's response came from 9 mouths, speaking in harmony and discord, each voice plotting a different future. "Unknown, unprecedented. Every possibility I calculate ends in variables I cannot predict. It's as if he exists outside fate itself." Nurgle's wheeze carried the weight of inevitable decay, but even his voice held a note of confusion. Nothing rots around him, nothing changes. He is stagnant in a way that even I find disturbing. Slanesh's whisper was seduction and horror intertwined. No desires, no excess, no passion. He is the absence of everything I am. How can something exist without wanting? The 4 gods turned their collective will toward Cadia, and the warp itself rippled with their focus. If this being could destroy their servants permanently, then they would send such a host that even his impossible strength would be overwhelmed. They would drown him in bodies. They would throw champions and princes at him until even his inexplicable power was exhausted. They had fought the Emperor himself. They had weathered the fury of the Primarchs. They were eternal, and they had learned patience through 10 millennia of the Long War. But they had never fought someone who looked this bored. On Cadia's surface, the remaining greater demons received their instructions simultaneously. The coordination was perfect, 4 gods acting as one, directing their servants with unified purpose. The Lord of Change shrieked a spell that would have turned a city's population into gibbering spawn. The Great Unclean One vomited a torrent of pestilence that could rot ceramite and corrupt souls. The 3 bloodthirsters dove in perfect formation, their brass axes singing hymns of slaughter. Saitama watched them come with the expression of someone waiting for a bus that was running late. The Lord of Change's spell, a weaving of warp energy that represented the culmination of 10,000 years of arcane knowledge, washed over him like colored light. It should have transformed him, twisted his flesh into impossible configurations, turned his mind inside out, and rewritten his existence into something useful to Tzeentch. Instead, it simply dissipated around him, like water flowing around a stone. The demon's 9 eyes widened in shock, as it realized that its magic didn't just fail to affect him, it failed to even recognize him as a valid target. The great, unclean one's plague torrent, a concentrated stream of Nurgle's rot that could reduce a space marine to screaming sludge in seconds, splashed across Saitama's yellow suit and cape. For a moment, the corruption clung to the fabric, writhing pustules attempting to take root. Then, as if the plague itself realized it was wasting its time, it simply sloughed off, leaving the suit completely clean, not disinfected, not purified, just unaffected. The disease couldn't comprehend how to infect something that didn't interact with the warp. The three bloodthirsters arrived as one, their axes forming a trinity of certain death that had felled titans and fortresses. They struck simultaneously from three different angles, a coordinated assault that would have overwhelmed even a greater demon of a rival god. Saitama moved. It wasn't fast by his standards, just a casual sidestep that took him approximately 1 meter to the left. But to everyone watching, he simply vanished from where he'd been standing and reappeared in a spot where all three axes whistled through empty air. The bloodthirsters' momentum carried them past their target, their coordination suddenly working against them as they collided with each other in a tangle of brass and rage. "Huh," Saitama said, watching the demons sort themselves out. "You guys are kinda slow." On the ramparts, Helena finally found her voice. "Tech Priest Moravec, I need an analysis. What in the Emperor's name is that thing?" Tech Priest Moravec had been running every sanctified scan his augmented body could manage. His mechadendrites twitched with agitation as his internal cogitators processed data that made no sense. "Commissar, the readings are contradictory." He registers as baseline human on all biological scans. No augmentation, no mutation, no xenos contamination. But the energy readings when he struck the demon... The tech priest's vocal synthesizer actually stuttered, a sign of extreme distress in a servant of the machine god. The Auspex couldn't measure it. It simply registered as yes. Yes. What kind of reading is yes? When I asked the machine spirit how much power was in that punch, it responded with a binary sequence that translates to all of it. When I asked for clarification, it shut down in what I can only describe as mechanical embarrassment. Helena turned back to watch the impossible battle unfolding before them. The three bloodthirsters had untangled themselves and were now circling the bald man with more caution, their demonic intelligence recognizing that brute force wasn't working. The Lord of Change had begun weaving a more complex spell, its wings tracing patterns in the air that hurt to look at directly. The great unclean one was laughing, a wet, phlegmy sound that promised worse plagues to come. "Still with us in the darkness? Hit that like button if this tale defies everything you thought you knew about power in the 41st millennium." Saitama yawned. It was a real, genuine yawn, the kind that came from being kept awake past bedtime, not from any tactical intimidation. He covered his mouth politely with one hand, then looked at the 5 greater demons with what could only be described as disappointment. "Look," he said, his voice carrying that same unnatural clarity. "I don't know what this place is or why everything's so dark and on fire, but I was kind of hoping for a challenge. You know, something that would actually take effort." He clenched his fist experimentally. "I came here through some kind of weird dimensional hole, and I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the place where I could finally have a real fight." The demons stared at him. Even their alien, corrupted minds could process the implication of what he was saying. This being, this impossible void entity, had destroyed one of Khorne's greatest champions and dodged their combined assault. And he was complaining that it wasn't challenging enough. Khorne's rage in the warp reached a crescendo. Through the connection between god and demon, the bloodthirsters felt their master's fury flooding into them, empowering them beyond their normal limits. They swelled with power, growing larger, their axes burning with the direct attention of the blood god himself. The Lord of Change's spell completed, and reality bent sideways as it cast a hex that should have trapped Saitama in a maze of infinite recursion. The great unclean one belched, and demons began spawning from its mouth, plague-bearers and nurglings by the dozens, creating a tide of corruption that flowed toward the yellow-suited figure. Saitama looked at the approaching swarm, at the reality-bending magic, at the empowered demon princes, and his expression finally changed. He smiled. Just a little, just enough to show that maybe, possibly, this might require him to put in slightly more effort than before. "Okay then," he said, getting into a basic fighting stance that any amateur boxer would recognize. "Let's see what you've got." The swarm of lesser demons reached Saitama first, a chittering, bubbling wave of plague-bearers and nurglings that moved with the single-minded hunger of a demonic tide. Each plague-bearer carried a rusted blade called a plague sword, weapons that wept infectious pus and could cause wounds that never healed. The nurglings, small imp-like creatures of concentrated disease, bounded forward with disturbing glee, their tiny claws dripping with maladies that could fell a dreadnought. In standard Imperial Guard doctrine, this many lesser demons required sustained heavy weapons fire, preferably supported by armored vehicles and sanctioned psychers. A single guardsman caught in such a swarm would be overwhelmed in seconds, his body becoming a host for countless plagues before his heart stopped beating. Saitama walked forward to meet them. Not charged, not rushed, walked. His pace was casual, almost leisurely, the kind of walk someone might use while strolling through a park on a pleasant afternoon. The first plague-bearer reached him, its plague sword raised for a strike that would infect him with 17 different strains of demon-born disease simultaneously. Saitama flicked it with his finger. The plague-bearer exploded into a fine green mist that dispersed before it could contaminate anything. The demon behind it suffered the same fate, and the one behind that. Saitama continued walking, and with each step, a dozen demons simply ceased to exist. He wasn't fighting them in any traditional sense. He was erasing them with the most minimal gestures possible. A finger flick here, a casual wave there. At one point, he brushed a cluster of nurglings aside like someone shooing away flies, and they atomized mid-air. "This is ridiculous," Sergeant Corris said over the Vox, his voice holding an edge of hysteria that 17 years of military discipline couldn't quite suppress. "This violates everything we know about demon combat. They're not being banished. They're just gone." Helena understood his distress. Every Cadian was raised on the fundamental truths of fighting chaos. Demons were manifestations of the warp, and only certain weapons could permanently harm them. Blessed bolter rounds, sanctified blades, psychic attacks from trained psychers. Even then, killing a demon just meant disrupting its physical form and sending it screaming back to the warp, where it would eventually reconstitute. You couldn't truly kill a demon any more than you could kill a thought or murder an emotion. Yet Saitama was doing exactly that. Each demon he touched didn't return to the warp. It simply stopped existing. Its connection to the Imperium severed so completely that not even a wisp of warp energy remained. The great unclean one watched its children being casually deleted and let out a roar that was part rage, part confusion, and part something that might have been fear. It charged forward, its massive bulk causing the ground to crack and suppurate with each thunderous step. When a greater demon of Nurgle moved, reality itself grew sick. Grass turned to pus-filled boils. Stone developed running sores. The very air became thick with contagion. Saitama looked up at the approaching mountain of diseased flesh and sighed. "You're really big," he observed, "but I don't think that's gonna help." The great unclean one brought its massive fist down in a blow that would have flattened a building. Saitama caught it with one hand. His arm didn't buckle. His feet didn't sink into the ground. He just stopped the demon's fist, holding back several thousand tons of corrupted demonic matter with the same ease someone might catch a thrown ball. The great unclean one's face, a grotesque parody of jolly corpulence, registered shock. It tried to pull its fist back. Saitama's grip didn't budge. The demon tried to swing its other arm, attempted to bite him with its cavernous mouth, even tried to simply fall on top of him using its enormous mass as a weapon. Nothing worked. "My turn," Saitama said. He pulled. The great unclean one, a demon that weighed as much as a small building and was anchored to this reality by the power of an actual god, flew through the air like a rag doll. Saitama had simply yanked it off its feet with one hand and sent it tumbling across the battlefield. The demon crashed through the remains of a collapsed hab block, pulverizing the rubble into dust, before slamming into the side of a half-destroyed fortress wall with enough force to crack the ancient stone. Before it could recover, Saitama was there. He'd crossed the 300 meters between them in a single step. Not a teleport, not a warp jump, just an impossibly fast movement that left a small crater where he'd pushed off. His fist was already drawn back. "Consecutive normal punches," he said, his voice carrying no particular emotion. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a systematic dismantling. Saitama's fists became a blur as he struck the great unclean one dozens of times per second, each punch delivered with perfect economical form. No wasted movement, no excess energy, just precise, devastating impacts that tore through demonic flesh like paper. The greater demon tried to regenerate. Nurgle's gifts always included the ability to recover from horrific wounds, but Saitama was punching faster than it could heal. Chunks of demon matter flew off with each hit, and unlike normal demon combat where severed parts would try to crawl back to the main body or spawn new horrors, these pieces simply evaporated the moment they separated. Saitama wasn't just destroying the demon's physical form. He was somehow erasing its very connection to the warp with each strike. In the Imperium, Nurgle felt pain. Not metaphorical pain. Not the abstract concept of loss. Actual, genuine pain as part of his essence was deleted from existence. The great unclean one was more than just a servant. It was a fragment of Nurgle himself, a portion of his power given form and purpose. And now that fragment was being systematically removed from reality. The Lord of Change decided that discretion was the better part of valor. It shrieked a spell of teleportation, preparing to flee back to the warp and report this impossibility to its master. The spell activated perfectly. Reality bent to accommodate its departure, and Saitama was standing in front of it. The daemon had teleported 17 kilometers away in a single instant, appearing above the burning ruins of a different fortress city. It should have been impossible for anything to follow that quickly. Teleportation magic operated outside of normal space-time. Yet there was the bald man in the yellow suit, floating in mid-air with his arms crossed, looking at the Lord of Change with an expression of mild reproach. "That's rude," Saitama said. "I'm not done yet." The Lord of Change's 9 eyes widened as it processed several horrifying facts simultaneously. First, this being could fly, despite having no wings, no psychic signature, no visible means of propulsion. Second, he had somehow tracked a teleportation spell and followed it instantaneously. Third, the spell it was preparing to counterattack, a hex that would trap him in an infinite loop of alternate realities, was already dissipating before it could even cast it, as if reality itself refused to let warp magic work in his immediate vicinity. Tzeentch, watching through his servant's eyes, recalculated every possible future and came to a conclusion that his nature fundamentally rejected. There was no scenario where his servants could defeat this being. Every future where they fought ended in their permanent destruction. The only variable was how long it took. For the architect of fate, this was worse than death. It was certainty. "You know what?" Saitama said, floating closer to the panicking Lord of Change. I'm getting tired of these one-sided fights. Do you guys have a boss or something? Someone who's actually strong? The Lord of Change, operating on pure survival instinct now, opened its beak and spoke with the voice of Tzeentch himself, 9 tones weaving together in impossible harmony. You want to fight the gods themselves? Saitama brightened considerably. You have gods. Are they strong? In the warp, the Chaos Gods felt something they hadn't experienced in eons, genuine apprehension. This being, this impossible void that walked like a man, had just asked to fight them directly, and he seemed excited about it. The proposition hung in the air like a suspended blade, and for a moment, even the endless war on Cadia seemed to pause in anticipation. The Lord of Change hovered before Saitama, its warp-stuffed body trembling with conflicting impulses. Flee, fight, report, analyze. Through its 9 eyes, 4 gods watched and calculated, each processing the question through the lens of their nature. Could they manifest in the material realm to face this threat directly? Technically, yes. The Eye of Terror was a wound in reality where the warp bled freely into real space. With sufficient sacrifice and ritual, they could project avatars of themselves into the physical universe. They had done it before, during the war in heaven, during the fall of the Eldar, during moments of crisis when reality itself hung in the balance. But those manifestations came at tremendous cost. To incarnate even a fraction of their true power required the deaths of billions, the destruction of entire star systems, and centuries of preparation. And for what? To fight something that their most powerful servants couldn't even scratch? Something that seemed to exist in a state of absolute physical supremacy that bypassed all the rules the warp operated under. Khorne's rage demanded acceptance. Yes, send him to us. We will drown him in blood. Tzeentch's calculation suggested caution. Wait, observe. He is patient 0 for a phenomenon we don't understand. Study him before committing. Nurgle's entropy saw opportunity. Let him come. All things decay eventually, even this. Slanesh's hunger overrode sense. Something that feels nothing. I must have him. I must make him feel. The debate lasted milliseconds in real space, eons in the warp's distorted time stream. Finally, they reached consensus, not through agreement, but through the understanding that this being would not simply go away if ignored. He had asked for the gods, and if denied, he might find a way to reach them anyway. The Lord of Change spoke, its voice now carrying the unified will of the 4 powers. You wish to face the gods, then come to the Eye of Terror. Come to the wound in reality, where we reign supreme. Enter the realm of chaos itself, and we shall grant you the battle you seek. Saitama's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm for the first time since arriving in this universe. Really? Awesome. How do I get there? The Lord of Change extended one wing, pointing toward the sky where the Eye of Terror dominated the horizon, a massive swirling vortex of impossible colors and mad geometries that had hung above Cadia for 10,000 years. Fly toward the wound. When you feel reality breaking, continue forward. We will ensure you reach us. Cool, thanks. Saitama turned to fly away, then paused. Oh, wait. What about these guys? He gestured to the 3 bloodthirsters, who had been circling at a distance, watching the exchange with growing uncertainty. The Lord of Change didn't hesitate. They will withdraw. You have earned safe passage to the Eye. The bloodthirsters howled in protest, their nature revolting against the concept of retreat, but Khorne's will was absolute. They banked away from Saitama, their brass wings carrying them back toward the warp rifts from which they'd emerged. The Lord of Change followed, its body already beginning to fade back into the Imperium. Saitama watched them go, then looked down at the battlefield below. For the first time, he seemed to really take in his surroundings. The burning fortress world, the trenches full of soldiers, the destruction that stretched to every horizon. His expression softened into something almost thoughtful. Then he descended, floating down toward Kasr-Galan's ramparts, where Helena and the 8th Cadian Regiment still stood in stunned silence. Hi," Saitama said, landing on the obsidian stone with barely a sound. Up close, he looked even more absurdly ordinary. His yellow suit was spotless despite wading through demon ichor. His white cape hung perfectly, despite the absence of wind. His bald head reflected the firelight with almost comical clarity. "Sorry about the mess. Those flying things were kinda annoying." Helena's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Her 17 years of military experience had prepared her for many things, but polite conversation with reality-warping anomaly was not among them. Her hand had moved unconsciously to her bolt pistol, but some deeply ingrained survival instinct told her that shooting this being would be spectacularly counterproductive. She started, then stopped. What did one say to someone who had just casually dismantled greater demons while complaining about stains? "Thank you for fighting them." Saitama shrugged. "They attacked first. I was just defending myself." He looked around at the assembled soldiers, taking in their purple fatigues, their well-maintained laser guns, the grim determination written on every face. "You guys fight those things often?" "Every day," Sergeant Chorus answered, his voice still holding an edge of disbelief. "For as long as any of us have been alive. This is Cadia. We stand between the Eye of Terror and the rest of the Imperium." Saitama processed this, his expression cycling through confusion, then comprehension, then something approaching respect. "That sounds really hard. You're pretty brave then." The simple sincerity of the statement hit harder than any formal commendation. These were soldiers who'd never received praise from anyone except their own officers, whose heroism was expected rather than celebrated, who fought and died in the Emperor's name, because that was what Cadians did. And now this being, this impossible entity who destroyed demons with finger flicks, was calling them brave. "We do our duty," Helena managed, falling back on the familiar comfort of military protocol. "As the Emperor commands, Cadia stands." "Who's the Emperor?" Saitama asked with genuine curiosity. The question sent a ripple of shock through every soldier within earshot. Tech Priest Moravek's mechadendrites twitched so violently that he nearly dropped his auspex. Not knowing the Emperor it was like not knowing what oxygen was or why the sun shone. The God Emperor of mankind was the foundation of human civilization, the immortal Lord who'd united terror and launched humanity to the stars. But looking at Saitama's earnest, curious face, it became clear that he genuinely had no idea. He wasn't being heretical or disrespectful. He simply didn't know. "The master of mankind," Helena explained carefully, watching for any sign of corruption or trickery. "The immortal Emperor who sits upon the golden throne on holy terror. He guides us, protects us, and gives us strength to fight the darkness. We are his soldiers." Saitama nodded slowly. "So, he's like your leader. That's cool. Does he fight too?" Helena paused. How did one explain the Emperor's current state to someone who had no context? "He is locked in eternal battle, even now. He sits upon the golden throne, keeping the darkness at bay through sheer will alone. He has not walked among us for 10,000 years, but his light still guides humanity." 10,000 years in the same chair? Saitama looked genuinely concerned. "That sounds uncomfortable. Has anyone checked if he needs a break?" The sheer mundanity of the question, asked with such innocent sincerity, was almost more shocking than watching him destroy demons. Several Cadians made the sign of the Aquila hastily, uncertain whether this constituted blasphemy or was simply profound ignorance. Before anyone could formulate a response, a Vox unit crackled to life. This is Inquisitor Covenant of the Ordo Malleus, transmitting on all Imperial frequencies. I am inbound to Kasser Galan with authorization from the highest levels of Terra. The anomalous entity designated Yellow Suit is to be detained for immediate questioning. All personnel are to maintain position and prevent its departure. The Emperor protects. Helena and her soldiers exchanged glances. Detain this being? The being that had casually destroyed 5 greater demons? The being that was about to fly into the Eye of Terror to fight the Chaos Gods themselves? Saitama perked up. Someone's coming? Are they strong? No, Helena said with absolute certainty, making a decision that would either save her career or end it. They're not. The inquisitorial transport cut through Cadia's burning sky like a black dagger, its engines screaming with the urgency of its mission. Inquisitor Covenant was not a patient man under the best circumstances, and the last 3 hours had tested what little patience he possessed. First, the astropathic reports of demon princes being deleted rather than banished. Then, the cogitator readings that made no sense, power signatures that registered as undefined, and threat assessments that simply displayed error messages. And finally, the garbled Vox transmission from a tech priest claiming that an unaugmented human had punched a bloodthirster out of existence. Covenant had seen many things in his 40 years serving the Ordo Malleus. He'd witnessed the opening of warp rifts, the summoning of greater demons, and the corruption of entire planetary populations. He'd authorized exterminatus on 3 separate occasions and personally executed 2 rogue inquisitors who'd fallen to chaos. He was a hard man who'd made hard choices in service to the Imperium. But this anomaly called Yellow Suit, represented something unprecedented, something that required the full attention of the Inquisition's demon-hunting specialists. His shuttle descended toward Kasser Galan's landing platform, retro thrusters firing in controlled bursts. Through the viewport, he could see the assembled Cadian regiment on the ramparts, and standing among them, looking absurdly out of place, was a bald man in what appeared to be a yellow jumpsuit. That was it. That was the being that had sent the warp into confusion. Covenant's hand moved to the cyber raven perched on his shoulder, a cybernetic familiar that served as both companion and psychic amplifier. Through it, he could sense the warp currents around the fortress. The taint was everywhere, of course. Cadia sat at the edge of the Eye of Terror, and the Imperium's presence was as constant as gravity. But around that yellow-suited figure, there was nothing. Not a void like a blank would create. Not a null zone that actively suppressed the warp. Just an absence, as if the warp didn't even register his existence. The shuttle's landing ramp descended with a pneumatic hiss, and Covenant strode out with the absolute confidence of a man backed by the full authority of the God Emperor himself. Behind him came his retinue, 2 throne agents in power armor, a sanctioned psyker with her eyes bound by blessed cloth, and a servo skull carrying recording equipment to document everything for the inquisitorial archives. "I am Inquisitor Covenant," he announced, his voice amplified by the Voxcaster in his ornate armor. "By the authority vested in me by the High Lords of Terra and the inquisitorial mandate, I hereby—" "Are you strong?" Saitama interrupted, walking forward with undisguised curiosity. Covenant stopped mid-proclamation, thrown off by the bizarre question. "What?" "Strong. You know, powerful. Good at fighting." Saitama looked him up and down, taking in the power armor, the multiple purity seals, the plasma pistol at his hip, the force sword crackling with psychic energy. "You've got a lot of fancy gear, so I figured maybe you're tough." "I am an Inquisitor of the Ordo Malleus," Covenant said, his voice hardening. "I have fought demons across 50 worlds. I carry the authority of the Emperor himself, and you, Anomaly, are coming with me for questioning." Saitama's expression fell. "So, That's a no then. You're not actually strong, you're just important. The casual dismissal of his authority, of the Inquisition's authority, sent a flash of anger through Covenant's augmented nervous system. I am ordering you to surrender yourself for Imperial custody. Refusal will be met with lethal force. I'm kinda busy, Saitama said, scratching his head. Those flying demon things said their bosses want to fight me, and that sounds way more interesting than answering questions. No offense. Covenant's hand moved to his plasma pistol. You are refusing a direct order from the Inquisition? I guess. Saitama looked genuinely uncertain about the proper protocol here. Look, I don't know what an Inquisition is, but I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just want a good fight. Those gods sound strong, so I want to test myself against them. The sanctioned psyker behind Covenant gasped, her bound eyes somehow still registering the blasphemy. He speaks of challenging the ruinous powers themselves. Inquisitor, his mind. I can't read it. It's not shielded. It's just not there. As if he has no thoughts, no emotions, no psychic presence whatsoever. All the more reason to detain him, Covenant said coldly. He raised his plasma pistol, the weapon's coils glowing blue-white with building charge. Final warning, surrender, or I will use force. Saitama looked at the weapon with mild interest. Is that a gun? It looks different from the ones those soldiers have. He gestured to the Cadians on the ramparts, who were watching this confrontation with expressions ranging from fascination to horror. Commissar Vrost, Covenant said, without taking his eyes off Saitama. I am ordering you and your regiment to assist in subduing this target. Fire on my command. Helena felt every eye turn to her. This was the moment where her career, and possibly her life, would be decided. She looked at Inquisitor Covenant, then at Saitama, then at her soldiers. These were men and women who'd followed her through 17 years of warfare, who'd trusted her judgment through countless battles. No, she said clearly. Covenant's head snapped toward her. What did you say? I said no, Inquisitor. With respect, you did not witness what this being is capable of. He destroyed 5 greater daemons, permanently destroyed them with casual effort. If you attack him, you will die. My soldiers will die, and it will accomplish nothing except wasting lives the Imperium needs. You are refusing a direct order from an Inquisitor? Covenant's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. I am exercising tactical judgment based on direct observation, Helena replied, her hand unconsciously touching her bolt pistol. Not to draw it, but for comfort. That being asked to fight the Chaos Gods themselves, and they agreed. They're terrified of him, Inquisitor. The warp is terrified. Think about what that means. Covenant's jaw clenched. His finger tightened on the plasma pistol's trigger. Then you are complicit in whatever heresy this creature represents. Wait, Saitama said, stepping between them with hands raised. Nobody needs to fight each other. Look, I'll make this easy. He turned to Covenant. If you can land one hit on me, just one, I'll go with you and answer whatever questions you want. But if you can't, you let me go fight those gods. Deal? The sheer audacity of the offer left Covenant speechless for a moment. This thing was offering him a free shot. As if an Inquisitor of the Ordo Malleus posed no threat whatsoever. You're making a mistake, Covenant said coldly. Maybe, Saitama agreed, but it seems fair. Covenant didn't hesitate. He fired. The plasma bolt erupted from his pistol with a crack of superheated air, a sun-bright sphere of energy that could melt through tank armor. It crossed the distance between them in a fraction of a second, moving at speeds that would vaporize an unarmored human on contact. Saitama caught it. Not with a force field, not with psychic powers. He reached out with his bare hand and simply closed his fingers around the plasma bolt as if catching a thrown ball. The superheated energy hissed and sputtered against his palm, then dissipated into nothing, its energy somehow absorbed or negated by his simple grip. "Huh," Saitama said, opening his hand to examine his palm. "That tickled a little. Got anything stronger?" Covenant's enhanced mind processed multiple responses simultaneously. Shock, disbelief, a calculation of tactics, and beneath it all, something he rarely felt: genuine fear. He'd just witnessed something that violated every law of physics and the warp. Plasma bolts didn't get caught. They exploded on contact. They ignored conventional defenses. They represented the fusion power of stars concentrated into a weapon. And this bald man in a yellow suit had caught one like it was a soap bubble. "Throne preserve us," the sanctioned psyker whispered. "He's not warp-touched. He's not even real. He's something else entirely." Comment your theories below. What kind of being exists outside the warp's influence entirely? Saitama looked at Covenant expectantly. "So, do I win? Can I go now?" Inquisitor Covenant's hand trembled, not from fear, though fear was certainly present, but from the sheer cognitive dissonance of what he'd just witnessed. His augmented mind, enhanced by decades of psycho-conditioning and surgical improvements, struggled to process the impossibility. The plasma bolt should have killed anything mortal. Should have. That word suddenly felt inadequate in describing the gulf between expectation and reality. "Inquisitor," one of his throne agents said carefully, his voice crackling through his helmet's Vox grill, requesting permission to engage with Hellgun at maximum setting. "Stand down," Covenant said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He holstered his plasma pistol with deliberate slowness, each movement a conscious acknowledgement of defeat. "Stand down, all of you." The throne agents exchanged glances but obeyed, their hellguns lowering to rest positions. The sanctioned psyker let out a breath she'd been holding, her shoulders sagging with relief. Covenant approached Saitama, each step requiring an act of will. He'd spent his entire adult life as a figure of absolute authority, someone whose word could condemn planets or spare them. Now he stood before a being that had casually demonstrated that all his authority, all his weapons, all his power meant precisely nothing. "What are you?" he asked, stripping away the formality and command presence. This was just a question, human too, whatever Saitama was. "I'm a hero for fun," Saitama replied with complete sincerity. "Back home, I fought bad guys and saved people. It was getting pretty boring because I got too strong. Nothing could challenge me anymore. Then I fell into that weird swirly hole and ended up here." He gestured at the burning hellscape of Cadia. "This place seems to have stronger enemies, so I'm kinda excited about it." "A hero," Covenant repeated, tasting the word. In the 41st millennium, that term had lost much of its meaning. There were warriors, soldiers, champions of the Emperor, but heroes. That was a word from ancient Terra's mythological past, before the age of strife, before the long night. "You fight for enjoyment." "Not exactly," Saitama corrected, his expression becoming more serious. "I fight to protect people. That's what heroes do. But I also hope to find someone who can give me a real challenge someday. Someone who can make me actually try." He looked down at his clenched fist. "I trained so hard that I became too strong. I can beat anything with one punch. It's lonely, I guess." The admission was so honestly melancholy that even Covenant felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Here was a being of incomprehensible power, and his greatest problem was that nothing could challenge him. It was absurd. It was tragic. It was completely at odds with everything the Inquisitor understood about the universe. "The Chaos Gods," Covenant said slowly, "are not enemies that can be beaten. They are fundamental forces of the universe. manifestations of sentient emotion given form in the warp. They cannot truly die. Even if you somehow destroyed their avatars, their essence would endure. They are eternal. But they can manifest, right? Saitama asked, his eyes brightening with interest. They can create bodies and fight? With sufficient sacrifice, yes. During the war in heaven, during the fall of the Eldar, they have projected fragments of themselves into reality. But the cost, Covenant trailed off. Billions die, reality itself tears. The very act of their manifestation destroys worlds. So they're really strong then? Saitama's excitement was palpable now, strong enough that I might actually have to try. Covenant studied the bald man's face, searching for any sign of corruption, of chaos taint, of the madness that comes from warp exposure. There was nothing, just genuine, almost childlike enthusiasm at the prospect of a challenging fight. No ambition for power like Tzeentch, no bloodlust like Khorne, no despair like Nurgle, no excess like Slaanesh. Just excitement about testing himself. "You're going to do this regardless of what I say, aren't you?" Covenant asked. "Yeah, probably," Saitama admitted. "Those demon things already invited me. It'd be rude not to show up." The Inquisitor made a decision that would either vindicate him or damn him in the eyes of the Inquisition. "Then I'm coming with you. Not to fight, I'm not that foolish, but to observe, to witness, to record whatever happens for the Inquisitorial archives." He turned to his retinue. "Thaddeus, return to the ship and transmit everything we've recorded to the Fortress Monastery on Titan. If we don't return within 24 hours, assume we're dead and classify this under Omega-level protocols." "Inquisitor, you can't seriously be—" the Throne Agent started. "That's an order, Thaddeus. Someone needs to survive to report this." Covenant turned back to Saitama. "You can protect me, yes? If I accompany you into the Eye?" Saitama shrugged. "Sure, I guess. I don't really know how, though. I've never protected anyone by taking them into a danger zone before. Usually I just punch the danger until it stops being dangerous." "That," Covenant paused, "that might actually work in the Eye of Terror." "Very well." He looked at Helena. "Commissar Vrost, you and your regiment showed wisdom today. I will ensure that's noted in my report. Cadia may fall, but you've given the Imperium something more valuable than one more day of defense. You've given us a chance to understand what this being is." Helena saluted crisply, relief evident in her posture. "The Emperor protects, Inquisitor." "Indeed he does, in the strangest ways imaginable." Covenant turned to his sanctioned psyker. "Miriam, can you sense anything about the Eye of Terror's current state?" The psyker's bound eyes turned toward the massive warp storm dominating the horizon. She was quiet for a long moment, her psychic senses reaching out into the immaterium. When she spoke, her voice trembled. "The four powers are preparing. They're gathering strength, calling in debts, summoning their greatest champions. They're afraid, Inquisitor. I can feel it through the warp's currents. For the first time in recorded history, the ruinous powers are afraid." "Good," Saitama said simply. "Fear means they'll take me seriously. I hate it when opponents don't try their best." Tech Priest Moravek's mechadendrites twitched with agitation. "If I may interject, Yellow Suit Entity, the Eye of Terror is a region where the laws of reality do not apply. Time does not flow linearly, space folds upon itself. The very concept of causality becomes negotiable. Even if you possess immunity to warp corruption, the environmental hazards alone could theoretically—" "I'll be fine," Saitama said with absolute confidence. "I've been through worse. Probably. Maybe." He paused. "Actually, no. I've never been through anything worse because everything's always been too easy. But I'm sure I'll be fine anyway." The casual certainty in his voice was somehow more convincing than any tactical analysis or probability calculation. This being didn't hope he would survive. He simply knew it, the way someone knows that water is wet or that the sun will rise. "How do we reach the eye?" Covenant asked, mentally preparing himself for what was almost certainly a suicide mission. He'd faced death before, but always with the comfort of faith, knowing that his soul would join the Emperor's light. Now he was about to venture into a realm where souls were currency and faith was a weakness to exploit. "That big swirly thing in the sky, right?" Saitama pointed at the Eye of Terror, where warp storms churned with malevolent intelligence. "We just fly toward it?" "Fly." "It's not quite that simple," Covenant began, but Saitama had already bent his knees slightly, preparing to jump. "Hold on tight, I guess," Saitama said. "I've never carried a passenger before, so this might be rough." Before Covenant could ask what he meant, Saitama grabbed him around the waist with one arm, an undignified position for an inquisitor, but dignity seemed a small price for survival, and launched himself into the sky. The acceleration should have killed Covenant instantly. His augmented body, designed to withstand extremes, creaked and groaned as they shot upward at speeds that turned the battlefield below into a blur. Within seconds, they'd cleared Cadia's atmosphere. Within minutes, they were approaching the border where reality ended and the warp began. The Eye of Terror loomed before them, a wound in the universe billions of kilometers across, where the screaming madness of chaos reigned supreme. It was beautiful in the way a nuclear explosion is beautiful, terrible, sublime, and absolutely deadly. Saitama flew directly toward it without hesitation. "This is it," Covenant whispered, clutching his Rosarius, a personal force field generator blessed by the ecclesiarchy, like a lifeline. The point of no return. "Cool," Saitama said. "Let's go punch some gods." And they crossed the threshold into pure chaos. Reality ended with a sound like tearing silk, magnified 1,000,000,000 times. One moment, Inquisitor Covenant could see stars, distant, cold, but reassuringly real. The next moment, there were no stars. There was no darkness between them. There was only color and sound and sensation, all capitalized because the lowercase versions were inadequate to describe what assaulted his senses. The Eye of Terror was not merely a region of space corrupted by chaos. It was a place where the material universe had given up pretending to follow its own rules. Here, the warp was reality, and reality was whatever the warp decided it should be. Covenant's enhanced optics tried to process what they were seeing and simply shut down, his augmented nervous system deciding that unconsciousness was preferable to madness. But unconsciousness wouldn't come. Some property of being held by Saitama kept his mind functional, if thoroughly horrified. He could see, Emperor preserve him, he could see the raw stuff of chaos flowing around them, thoughts given form, emotions made tangible, impossible geometries that his brain tried to interpret as buildings or landscapes or entities before giving up and simply registering them as things that are. "Whoa," Saitama said, looking around with genuine curiosity. "This place is weird. Is that supposed to be a mountain or a really big face?" Covenant followed his gaze and immediately regretted it. What Saitama was pointing at was both a mountain and a face, and also neither, and possibly something that would drive a lesser person mad just by contemplating it. "Don't look directly at anything," he managed through gritted teeth. "The Eye of Terror shows you what will break your mind most efficiently." "Huh." Saitama stared directly at a floating impossibility that seemed to be simultaneously on fire, drowning, and screaming in colors that shouldn't exist. "Doesn't really bother me, just looks like abstract art." Of course, it didn't bother him. Nothing bothered him. The warp's most insidious weapon, the ability to corrupt through mere exposure, to twist thoughts and break minds just by existing nearby, simply had no effect. He flew through the Eye of Terror with the same casual ease he'd walked across Cadia's battlefield, completely immune to the existential horror surrounding them. "Where are we going?" Saitama asked. "This place is really big." Before Covenant could answer, assuming he had an answer, the environment around them began to change with nauseating speed. The formless chaos coalesced into something more structured, more purposeful. They were being guided, Covenant realized with cold dread. The four powers were directing them toward a destination. The sky, if that word had meaning here, split into four distinct regions, each radiating the unmistakable signature of one of the Chaos Gods. To the left, endless battlefields where warriors fought and died and fought again in eternal combat, Khorne's domain. To the right, gardens of pestilence where diseases bloomed like flowers, Nurgle's realm. Above, impossible labyrinths that shifted and changed with every blink, Tzeentch's maze. Below, palaces of excess, where every sensation was amplified to the point of agony, Slaanesh kingdom. And at the center, where all four domains met, a vast arena was forming. It rose from nothing, or perhaps it had always been there, and was only now choosing to be perceived. A colosseum the size of a solar system, its walls built from compressed screaming souls, its floor made of crystallized moments of pure emotion. "That looks like a fighting ring," Saitama observed. "Nice. I was worried we'd have to fight in some weird maze or something." Covenant's Rosarius was glowing so hot, it burned against his armor, its blessed energies working overtime to protect him from the raw chaos saturation. The four powers are creating a space where they can manifest this level of reality manipulation. They're sacrificing billions of souls to fuel this. Entire worlds are dying right now to give them the power to face you. "That's messed up," Saitama said, his expression darkening slightly. "They're killing people just to fight me?" "It's what they do. Death, suffering, change, and sensation. These are the currencies of chaos. Every murder in Khorne's name, every plague that spreads, every plot that succeeds, every excess indulged, it feeds them. They've had 10,000 years to gather power, and now they're spending it all at once." They descended toward the arena, and as they approached, Covenant could see figures beginning to manifest at its four corners. Not the gods themselves, not yet, but their heralds, their chosen champions, the mightiest servants of the ruinous powers, summoned to soften up this impossible threat before the gods themselves took the field. At the northern corner, a figure of pure brass and bloodlust materialized. Skarbrand, the exiled one, greatest of all bloodthirsters. A demon so powerful that even Khorne had cast it out after it dared strike at the blood god himself. Its rage was so profound that reality burned around it, space itself combusting in sympathy with its fury. At the eastern corner, a maze of pink and blue flesh assembled itself into Kairos Fate Weaver, the Oracle of Tzeentch. A lord of change with two heads that could see all possible pasts and futures, whose every word was both truth and lie, whose very existence was a paradox made manifest. At the southern corner, rot and pestilence coalesced into Kugath Plaguefather, a great unclean one who carried the most virulent diseases ever conceived. Where it stood, the arena floor began to suppurate and weep, reality itself becoming infected. At the western corner, something too beautiful and too horrible to properly describe took form. Keeper of Secrets Inkari, Slaanesh's favored child, a demon of such overwhelming presence that even looking in its direction caused Covenant's nervous system to overload with contradictory sensations. 4 greater demons, 4 exalted champions, each one powerful enough to lay waste to entire sectors, each one backed by the full might of a chaos god. And they were just the opening act. "Okay," Saitama said, setting Covenant down on what passed for solid ground at the arena's edge. Stay here. This might get messy." "Wait." Covenant grabbed his arm, or tried to. His power-armored hand simply slid off Saitama's sleeve, as if the fabric was somehow more real than blessed ceramite. "You're facing 4 exalted demons. Even with your power, tactics might—" "I'll be fine," Saitama said with that same unshakable confidence. "Just watch. And hey, if those god guys show up, let me know. They're who I really want to fight." He walked toward the center of the arena, hands in his pockets, cape billowing in winds that came from emotion rather than air currents. The 4 demon champions turned their attention to him simultaneously, and even from a distance, Covenant could feel the weight of their combined malice. Skarbrand roared, a sound that was every act of violence that had ever occurred compressed into a single note of pure rage. It charged forward, its massive wings propelling it across the arena in seconds, its fists, each the size of a transport, raised to pulverize this impudent mortal. Saitama took his hands out of his pockets. "Here we go again," he said, sounding almost bored. In the Imperium, in their respective realms, 4 gods leaned forward on their impossible thrones. They'd thrown their greatest champions into battle. They'd created a space where reality itself would bend to their will. They'd sacrificed the equivalent of 1,000 worlds' worth of souls to power this confrontation. And yet, watching Saitama take a simple fighting stance, they felt something that made even their eternal essences hesitate. Doubt. The tension builds. Subscribe to witness more tales from where even gods learn fear in the dark millennium. Skarbrand, the Exiled One, crashed into Saitama like a meteor made of brass and hatred. The impact created a shockwave that rippled across the arena, distorting space-time in concentric circles. Where the demon's fists struck, reality fractured into bleeding fissures. This was a being that had fought at the side of Khorne himself, whose rage was so pure that it had transcended mere emotion and become a fundamental force of nature. Its first punch could have shattered a fortress monastery. Its second punch could have pulverized a battle titan. Its third punch, fourth punch, 100th punch, each one fell with the weight of mountains, with the speed of lightning, with the fury of a god scorned. Saitama stood there and took them all without moving an inch. Not blocking, not dodging, simply standing still while a being of pure violence unloaded its entire arsenal of destruction upon him. Each impact that should have reduced him to atomic particles instead just stopped, as if Skarbrand was punching a wall that extended into infinite dimensions, something so fundamentally immovable that even the concept of force had no meaning against it. "Are you done?" Saitama asked after what might have been 1,000 punches or a single instant. Time had little meaning here. Skarbrand pulled back its fist for another strike, and Saitama caught it casually in one hand. The demon's momentum stopped completely, all that kinetic energy simply vanishing into wherever physics went to die in Saitama's presence. "My turn," Saitama said. He flicked Skarbrand's nose. The gesture was so absurdly casual, so completely disrespectful to a being of infinite rage, that for a moment even the arena seemed to pause in confusion. Then Skarbrand, the Exiled One, the demon that had dared strike at Khorne himself, went flying backward so fast it broke the sound barrier, the light barrier, and several barriers that physics hadn't gotten around to naming yet. The demon crashed through the arena wall, that wall made of compressed souls, and kept going, tumbling through the warp like a brass comet until it disappeared from sight entirely. "One down," Saitama said, dusting off his hands. Kairos Fateweaver had been watching this exchange with both of its heads, each one processing the information differently. The right head saw all possible futures where it attacked Saitama. The left head saw all possible pasts where similar beings had existed. Both heads arrived at the same conclusion. Survival required not fighting this entity. But Tzeentch's will was absolute. and the Lord of Change had no choice but to engage. It raised its staff, a twisted branch from the tree of eternal knowledge, and began weaving a spell of such complexity that merely describing it would take a century. Reality bent in 9 different directions simultaneously. Time split into branching paths where every possible outcome occurred at once. The very concept of cause and effect became negotiable. Kairos cast a hex that would trap Saitama in an infinite recursion of moments, each one feeding into the next, creating a loop from which there could be no escape. It was a spell that had once trapped a Primarch for 1,000 years, a spell that had broken the minds of Eldar Farseers who tried to unravel it, a spell that rewrote the past, present and future simultaneously. Saitama walked through it, not through any counter-magic or psychic defense. He simply walked forward, and the spell parted around him like a river flowing around a stone. The infinite recursion couldn't trap something that existed in a state of absolute physical presence. The temporal manipulation couldn't affect someone who apparently existed in all moments simultaneously by virtue of just being there. "That was a neat light show," Saitama commented, reaching Kairos, "but it didn't do anything." Both heads of the Oracle spoke in perfect unison, something that had never happened in its entire existence. Impossible. "Yeah, I get that a lot," Saitama said. Then he grabbed both of Kairos's heads, one in each hand, and with a casual motion that suggested opening a particularly stubborn jar, twisted. The Oracle of Tzeentch, the demon that knew all pasts and all futures, experienced something it had never predicted: its own permanent death. Both heads separated from the body, which dissolved into warp stuff and scattered to non-existence. The heads themselves hung in Saitama's grip for a moment, their eyes wide with the shock of absolute surprise, before they too faded into nothing. Inquisitor Covenant, watching from the arena's edge, felt his worldview breaking apart and reforming into something new. He'd spent 40 years believing that certain truths were absolute. The Emperor was the pinnacle of human achievement. The Chaos Gods were eternal. Demons could be banished, but never truly killed. These were facts as solid as mathematics. Saitama was rewriting those facts with his fists. Kugath Plaguefather observed the destruction of 2 exalted champions and decided that direct confrontation was inadvisable. Instead, it began vomiting. This wasn't mere nausea. It was the distilled essence of every disease that had ever existed, every plague that had ever ravaged a world, every pestilence that had ever rotted flesh and corrupted spirit, viruses that could survive in hard vacuum, bacteria that could eat through adamantium, fungal infections that could colonize souls themselves. The tide of corruption flowed across the arena floor, bubbling and churning, transforming everything it touched into diseased matter. The crystallized emotions that formed the floor began rotting, screaming in agony as they dissolved. The wall of compressed souls grew pustules and weeping sores, and Saitama stood in the middle of it, completely unaffected. The plagues washed over him like water over polished stone, finding no purchase, no weakness, no vulnerability. His yellow suit remained pristine. His skin showed no signs of infection. He didn't even wrinkle his nose at the overwhelming stench of decay that was strong enough to kill a normal human from olfactory shock alone. "Gross," Saitama said, wrinkling his nose after all, but not really dangerous. He jumped. The leap carried him over the tide of disease in a perfect arc, landing directly in front of Kugath. The great unclean one tried to envelop him in a bear hug that would crush him against its diseased flesh, infecting him through sheer contact with its concentrated corruption. Saitama punched it in its massive, distended belly. The impact created a shockwave that cleared away all the diseases in an expanding sphere, purifying the arena through simple kinetic force. Kugath's body, held together by warp energy and the will of Nurgle, simply couldn't withstand the physical trauma. It ruptured, its essence scattering like a popped balloon, diseases evaporating before they could find new hosts. 3 down. Nkari had been preparing its assault carefully, studying Saitama's movements, looking for any sign of weakness or desire that could be exploited. As a servant of Slaanesh, it knew that every being wanted something. Power, pleasure, victory, recognition. These were the currencies it dealt in. And surely this being who sought a challenge must desire something. But looking at Saitama's expression as he turned toward it, Nkari realized the horrible truth. This being didn't desire a challenge in the way mortals, or even immortals, understood desire. He simply wanted to test himself, to see if anything could make him try. It wasn't ambition or hunger. It was curiosity, pure and simple, and completely unexploitable. Still, Nkari had no choice. It attacked with every tool in its considerable arsenal. Psychic assaults that would overload minds with sensation, physical strikes with claws that could cut through reality itself, seductive whispers that had brought heroes and champions to their knees. Every technique perfected over 10,000 years of corruption and excess. Saitama caught one of its claws mid-strike. "You're the 4th one, right?" he asked. "Are the actual gods going to show up? Or is this it?" Nkari tried to pull back, but Saitama's grip was absolute. It tried to seduce him with visions of ultimate pleasure. It tried to horrify him with images of ultimate pain. It tried to confuse him with sensations that were both and neither simultaneously. "I'm getting impatient," Saitama said, and there was something in his voice that Nkari, despite being a being of pure excess, had never heard before. Genuine disappointment bordering on frustration. He pulled. Nkari, the keeper of secrets, Slaanesh's favored champion, came apart like wet tissue paper. One moment it existed, the next it didn't. No dramatic death scene, no final words, just cessation of existence. 4 exalted demons, 4 permanent deaths. Total time elapsed. Approximately 3 minutes. Saitama stood alone in the center of the arena, looking around at the 4 corners where the champions had manifested. "Okay," he called out, his voice somehow carrying to every corner of the Eye of Terror. "That was your warm-up. Now can the real fight start?" The arena trembled. The warp itself shuddered. And from 4 directions simultaneously, presences began to manifest that made the demon champions seem like candles compared to stars. The Chaos Gods were accepting his challenge. The manifestation of the Chaos Gods was not a gradual process. It was a sudden, catastrophic rewriting of reality that happened all at once. The arena, already impossibly large, expanded to contain presences that existed on scales mortal minds couldn't fully comprehend. Inquisitor Covenant's Rosarius screamed, its machine spirit overwhelmed by the sheer concentration of warp energy. His augmented body went into emergency shutdown, every non-essential system powering down to preserve his sanity. But through eyes that were seeing too much, he witnessed the arrival of the 4. From the north came Khorne, and reality bled. The blood god manifested as a mountain of brass and rage, seated upon a throne of skulls that extended into infinity. His form was humanoid only in the loosest sense, 8 times the height of a warlord titan, clad in armor forged from the concept of violence itself. His face was a brass skull within a brass helm, and from the eye holes burned flames that were every murder that had ever been committed. In one hand, he held a blade that was not a sword, but the fundamental idea of cutting, separation, ending. From the east came Tsinch, and reality fractured. The architect of fate appeared as a constantly shifting mass of forms, now a great bird with 9 wings, now a humanoid shape made of living crystal, now a geometric impossibility that hurt to perceive. Colors that had no names swirled around it. Its voice, when it spoke, came from the past, present, and future simultaneously. Every change that had ever occurred in the universe was a feather in its wings. From the south came Nurgle, and reality rotted. The Plague Lord manifested as a grotesque mountain of diseased flesh, jolly and horrifying in equal measure. His laugh was the sound of entropy, the inevitable decay of all things. Flies the size of fighter craft buzzed around his corpulent form. His garden, that realm where diseases bloomed like flowers, extended outward from his presence, corrupting the arena floor into festering gardens of pestilence. In his hands, he held a cauldron from which all plagues originated. From the west came Slaanesh, and reality screamed. The Dark Prince appeared as something too beautiful and too terrible to properly describe, a form that was both male and female, both alluring and repulsive, both creator and destroyer. It existed in a state of constant excess, every sensation amplified to impossible degrees. Where it stood, the air became thick with an overload of stimuli that would drive normal humans to madness from sheer sensory overload. Its voice was a choir of the damned singing hymns to perfection and corruption intertwined. These were not the limited avatars that sometimes manifested in the material realm. These were the gods themselves, given as much form as the Eye of Terror could contain, backed by 10,000 years of accumulated power and the sacrifice of billions upon billions of souls. The weight of their presence should have crushed Covenant into paste, should have annihilated his soul and scattered it across the warp. But something, perhaps Saitama's proximity, perhaps the Emperor's distant protection, perhaps sheer dumb luck, kept him conscious and alive to witness what happened next. Saitama looked up at the four gods, craning his neck to take in their impossible scale. His expression cycled through several emotions in rapid succession: awe at their size, appreciation for the spectacle, curiosity about their nature, and finally, settling on a small smile. "Now this is more like it," he said. "You guys look way stronger than those other ones." "Mortal." Khorne's voice was every battle cry ever shouted, every weapon ever struck in anger, every final breath of a warrior dying in combat. "You have destroyed our servants. You have defied our will. You exist as an impossibility that offends the very nature of the warp. For this, you will be unmade. We have seen every possible future." Tzeentch's 9 voices wove together, each speaking a different probability. "In none of them do you survive what comes next. Your death is certain. Your defeat is written in the fabric of fate itself." "Little thing, little void thing." Nurgle's wheeze was almost affectionate, grandfatherly despite being laced with decay. "You cannot fight entropy. All things must rot. All things must decay. Even you, who exist outside our sight, must eventually fall to grandfather's embrace. We will teach you sensation." Slaanesh's voice was seduction and torture combined. "We will make you feel. We will fill that void within you with such overwhelming experience that you will beg for the mercy of feeling nothing again." Saitama listened to all 4 declarations, nodding politely as each god spoke. When they finished, he cracked his knuckles, the sound somehow audible over the ambient screaming of the warp. "Okay, cool speeches," he said, "but I have one question before we start." The 4 gods paused, surprised. No mortal had ever interrupted their proclamations before. No being had ever treated their declarations with such casual disregard. "Are you guys going to come at me one at a time or all at once? Because if you're going one at a time, this might take a while. But if you all attack together, maybe, just maybe, you'll actually make me use a serious punch." The implication hung in the air like a challenge. Everything Saitama had done so far, destroying greater demons, obliterating exalted champions, walking through their most powerful magics, had been done casually, without effort, without even trying. And now he was suggesting that facing 4 gods simultaneously might require him to take things seriously. The arrogance should have been laughable, should have been the last words of a fool who didn't understand the forces arrayed against him. But none of the gods laughed. They had witnessed what he'd done to their champions. They'd felt the permanent severing of those connections, the absolute deletion of beings that should have been eternal. They'd watched him walk through spells and plagues and attacks that should have been utterly lethal. And most disturbing of all, they'd noticed that he wasn't protected by some greater power. He wasn't shielded by the Emperor's light or defended by ancient artifacts. He was just immune. Fundamentally, completely, absolutely immune to everything they represented. Khorne rose from his throne of skulls, and the arena shook with his fury. "We will come at you together, Void Thing, and we will show you why we are eternal." The other 3 gods rose as well, arranging themselves in a formation that surrounded Saitama completely. 4 directions, 4 gods, 4 fundamental aspects of chaos given ultimate form: rage, change, decay, and excess. United for the first time in 10 millennia, focused on a single target. In the material universe, across 1,000 sectors, psychers screamed and died as the gods' attention shifted completely away from their usual schemes. Wars paused as demon armies froze in confusion, their connection to the warp suddenly redirected. The Great Rift itself, that massive tear across the galaxy, shuddered as the 4 diverted all their power to this single confrontation. This was no longer about corrupting a single being or testing an anomaly. This had become an existential threat to the Chaos Gods themselves. If this void entity could permanently destroy their servants, could walk through their domains without corruption, could treat their manifestations as a challenge rather than certain death, then what did that mean for their eternal nature? For the first time since the war in heaven, the Chaos Gods felt genuinely threatened. Saitama dropped into a proper fighting stance, feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent, one fist drawn back. It was the same basic stance any martial artist might use, nothing fancy or esoteric. But seeing him take a serious posture sent a ripple of unease through the warp. "All right," he said, and there was anticipation in his voice. Real anticipation. The kind of excitement he hadn't felt in years. "Let's see if you guys can finally give me a real fight." The Chaos Gods attacked as one. The simultaneous assault of 4 Chaos Gods was something that had never occurred in the history of the universe. Even during the war in heaven, when the Old Ones and their servants battled the Citan, the ruinous powers had remained divided, each pursuing their own agenda. Even during the fall of the Eldar, when Slanesh had been born in a psychic cataclysm, the gods had fought amongst themselves as much as they'd fought reality. But now, faced with something that threatened their very existence, they moved in perfect coordination. Khorne struck first, his blade of conceptual violence descending in an arc that split dimensions. Where the edge passed, reality itself was severed, creating a wound in space-time that would take millennia to heal. The blow carried the weight of every battle ever fought, the momentum of every drop of blood ever spilled. It was not merely a physical attack, it was violence given absolute form. Tzeentch's spell activated simultaneously, a working of such complexity that it existed in 9 dimensions at once. It rewrote the past so that Saitama had always been vulnerable, altered the present so that he stood in 9 different positions simultaneously, and changed the future so that his defeat was retroactively guaranteed. Reality itself bent backward, trying to accommodate the paradox. Nurgle's plague breath swept across the arena, a miasma that contained every disease that had ever existed, and every disease that would ever exist. It was entropy accelerated to its logical conclusion. Not just death, but the death of death itself. The decay of the concept of decay. Even the warp stuff of the arena began to age and crumble. Slaaneş's assault was the most insidious. It attacked not with blades or spells or plagues, but with pure sensation. Every nerve ending in Saitama's body should have been overloaded with simultaneous pleasure and pain. His consciousness fractured into experiencing every possible sensation at once. It was an attack designed to break not the body, but the very concept of self. 4 attacks, 4 gods, 4 fundamental forces of chaos concentrated on a single point in space-time. Saitama deflected Khorne's blade with his forearm. The sound was like reality's bell being struck by an impossible hammer. The blade, that weapon forged from the concept of violence itself, met Saitama's unprotected flesh and stopped. Not slowed, not diverted, stopped, as if the most fundamental idea of cutting had encountered something even more fundamental, the idea of not being cut. Khorne's brass face registered something approximating shock. In 10,000 years of warfare, his blade had never failed to sever what it struck. It had cut through Titan armor, through blessed ceramite, through the hulls of warships, through the very fabric of reality. But it could not cut this bald man's arm. Tzeentch's spell collapsed upon itself. The retroactive rewriting of causality encountered the simple fact that Saitama existed in the present, and no amount of temporal manipulation could change that. He wasn't resistant to the spell. He simply existed in a state where the spell couldn't recognize him as a valid target. It was like trying to edit a book while the author was still writing it, except the author was writing in a language that didn't exist yet. Nurgle's plague breath washed over Saitama and nothing. The diseases found no purchase. The entropy found nothing to decay. His yellow suit remained pristine. His skin showed no signs of age or corruption. He existed in a state of perfect stasis, not through any active defense, but simply because decay required time, and time required change, and change required acknowledging that he was subject to natural laws. Slaaneş's sensory assault struck him full force, and he blinked once, mildly confused. "Did someone just touch my brain?" he asked. That felt weird. That was it. The culmination of the Dark Prince's most devastating attack, refined over 10 millennia of corrupting souls, and Saitama experienced it as mildly weird, not painful, not pleasurable, not overwhelming, just weird, like a brief static shock or an unexpected sneeze. 4 attacks, 4 failures, 4 gods experiencing something they had never felt before: inadequacy. "My turn," Saitama said. He punched Khorne. It wasn't a serious punch. It was barely even a committed punch. It was more like a jab, a testing blow to gauge his opponent's durability. But when Saitama's fist connected with the blood god's armored chest, the impact created a shockwave that propagated through the warp itself. Khorne, a being whose physical form was maintained by the rage of every warrior in the galaxy, staggered backward, his brass armor showing a dent where the fist had struck. A dent in a god, in a being whose very existence was conceptual rather than physical. Saitama had somehow punched a concept hard enough to damage it. "Impossible!" Khorne roared. But there was a new quality to his voice: uncertainty. "I am eternal. I am rage itself. I cannot be harmed." "Yeah, but I just did harm you," Saitama pointed out reasonably. "So maybe you're not as eternal as you think." The logical simplicity of the statement was more devastating than any insult. Khorne had built his entire existence on absolute certainties. War is eternal, violence is inevitable, blood must flow. But this being had just introduced doubt into that equation. Tzeentch tried a different approach. Instead of trying to alter Saitama's reality, it began altering the arena itself. reshaping the battlefield into a maze of infinite recursion where every path led to 9 different impossibilities. If it couldn't change Saitama, it would change everything around him. Saitama looked at the maze forming around him, the walls of crystallized possibilities and probability storms. Then he punched the nearest wall. The maze shattered. Not just the wall, the entire structure, all 9 dimensions of it, all infinite recursions and branching possibilities. It simply broke, like hitting a window with a hammer, except the window was the concept of fate itself, and the hammer was a bald man who didn't care about concepts. But that's not how it works. Tzeentch's 9 voices were unified in confusion. You can't just break fate. It's not a physical thing. I don't know what fate is, Saitama admitted, but it looked like a wall, so I punched it. Seemed to work. Nurgle watched this exchange with his one good eye, his jolly demeanor slipping for the first time in eons. If this being could damage Khorne and shatter Tzeentch's schemes through simple physical force, then perhaps a more direct approach wasn't wise. Instead, he tried to reason with the anomaly. Little void thing, why do you fight us? We offer you what you seek, eternal challenge, endless battle, infinite variety. Join us, and you will never be bored again. Saitama considered this seriously, his expression thoughtful. For a moment, even Covenant dared to hope that perhaps diplomacy might work where power had failed. Then Saitama shook his head. Nah. You guys kill people to get stronger, right? That's not cool. Heroes don't team up with bad guys, even if they're strong. The simple moral clarity of the statement echoed through the warp. In a realm where morality was whatever the strongest will decided it was, where right and wrong were weapons to be wielded rather than principles to follow, Saitama had just stated an absolute. He was a hero, and heroes didn't compromise with evil. It was absurd. It was childish. It was completely inflexible. It was terrifying. Slaanesh, perhaps understanding Saitama better than the others, realized that conventional attacks wouldn't work. This being existed in a state of absolute simplicity. He was strong. He wanted a challenge. He punched things. Complex schemes, subtle corruption, overwhelming sensations. None of that mattered to someone who reduced every problem to, can I punch it? So Slaanesh tried the one thing that might actually work. They made themselves punchable. The Dark Prince condensed their form, compressing their essence from a sprawling manifestation of excess into a more physical shape. It was still larger than a titan, still radiating the uncomfortable sensation of too much everything, but it was something that could theoretically be fought in a conventional manner. Come then, Slaanesh purred, their voice somehow both seductive and challenging. Show us this strength you possess. Make us feel something new. Saitama's face lit up. Finally, one of them was willing to actually fight properly. He rushed forward, closing the distance in a single step, and threw a proper punch. Still not serious, but more committed than before. The impact sent Slaanesh flying across the arena, their form trailing streamers of warp energy like a comet. They crashed into the far wall and slumped down, their perfect features showing something that might have been shock or might have been ecstasy. With Slaanesh, it was hard to tell. That was better, Saitama said, bouncing on the balls of his feet like a boxer warming up. You actually moved when I hit you. That means you're actually fighting back properly. The Chaos Gods looked at each other, a moment of silent communication passing between them. They were gods. They were eternal. They had existed for millions of years and would exist for millions more. They had brought civilizations to their knees, corrupted saints, and feasted on the souls of the faithful, but they had never fought anything like this. The Chaos Gods regrouped, and for the first time in their existence, they strategized as true allies rather than rivals. Through the warp's twisted channels, they communicated in ways that transcended language. sharing power, coordinating attacks, merging their essences in combinations that had never been attempted before. Khorne and Nurgle combined first, rage and entropy flowing together into a singular attack. Khorne's blade began to rust and corrode even as it swung, becoming a weapon that was both violence and decay. Where it passed, it didn't just cut, it aged, causing whatever it struck to experience 10,000 years of deterioration in an instant. The attack came at Saitama from an angle that existed between dimensions, a strike that was both sword and plague. Saitama caught the blade between his palms, stopping it with the classic technique of every martial arts student. The rust flaked off against his hands, the temporal decay washing over him harmlessly. He looked at the combined weapon thoughtfully. Teamwork, huh? That's smart. He twisted his hands, and the blade of violence and entropy shattered into fragments that dissolved before hitting the ground. But still not enough. Tzeentch and Slaanesh combined next, weaving a spell that existed in the space between thought and sensation. It was change made manifest through excess, overwhelming transformation that rewrote reality through pure experience. The arena around Saitama began to shift into impossible configurations, each moment fracturing into 9 different sensory experiences, each experience becoming a different possible reality. Saitama walked through it like someone walking through a particularly persistent cobweb, brushing away entire rewritten realities with casual swipes of his hand. "This is getting repetitive," he observed. "Do you guys have anything that isn't magic or weird reality stuff?" The question was genuine, almost plaintive. He'd come here hoping for a physical challenge, something that would make his muscles strain and his heart pound. Instead, he was getting abstract concepts and metaphysical attacks that his body simply didn't acknowledge as real threats. The Chaos Gods realized their fundamental problem. They were beings of the Imperium, of thought and emotion given form. Their attacks worked by exploiting the connection between the material realm and the warp, by corrupting souls and twisting reality. But Saitama had no soul to corrupt. He existed in a state of pure material presence, completely disconnected from the warp. Fighting him was like trying to corrupt a rock or seduce a mathematical equation. But they were gods. They had existed for eons. They had destroyed species and birthed nightmares. They would not be defeated by a single anomaly, no matter how impossible. All 4 gods combined their power into a single, unified assault. Khorne's rage, Tzeentch's change, Nurgle's entropy, and Slaanesh's excess, 4 fundamental aspects of chaos, merged into one overwhelming attack. The arena itself began to collapse under the weight of their combined will. The warp screamed as reality and unreality tried to occupy the same space simultaneously. They created a singularity of pure chaos, a point where all 4 aspects existed in perfect unity, a weapon that could unmake anything that existed in any form, material or immaterial. It was the ultimate expression of their power, the culmination of 10,000 years of accumulated strength, fueled by the deaths of billions and the corruption of countless souls. They hurled it at Saitama. The singularity expanded as it flew, growing from a point to a sphere that contained infinite possibility and impossible certainty. It warped space-time around it, creating a gravitational pull that sucked in reality itself. Inquisitor Covenant, watching from the arena's edge, felt his consciousness being pulled toward it, his very existence threatening to unravel. Saitama looked at the approaching sphere of absolute destruction, and his expression changed. The casual boredom faded. The mild interest sharpened. For the first time since entering the Eye of Terror, he looked genuinely engaged. "Okay," he said, pulling his fist back properly, taking a real stance, muscles coiling with intent. "You guys are finally trying. I should return the favor. His fist began to glow, not with warp energy or psychic power, but with simple kinetic energy concentrated to impossible density. The air around his hand didn't heat up or catch fire. It simply ceased to exist, unable to handle the sheer physical force being compressed into a single point. "Serious punch," Saitama said. He threw the punch. What happened next could not be properly described in words that existed in any human language. The serious punch met the chaos singularity in the center of the arena, and for one frozen moment, nothing moved. Two absolute forces, one of pure physical might, one of pure warp corruption, pressed against each other in perfect stalemate. Then Saitama's punch won. The singularity didn't explode or dissipate. It simply ceased to be, unraveled by the application of force so absolute that even conceptual attacks had to acknowledge it. The shockwave that followed was visible reality trying to adjust to what had just occurred. It rippled outward in expanding rings, each one carrying enough force to level a continent. The four chaos gods were blown backward, their manifestations destabilizing, their forms losing cohesion. For beings of pure will and emotion, being physically forced backward was an experience they'd never had. They were gods. They didn't get pushed. They didn't retreat. But they were retreating now. Khorne's brass armor showed cracks. Tzeentch's constantly shifting form locked into a single configuration, too disrupted to change. Nurgle's jolly demeanor vanished, replaced with genuine concern. Slaaneish's perfect features showed something that might have been fear or might have been the most intense sensation they'd ever experienced. With the Dark Prince, those were often the same thing. "What are you?" All four gods spoke in unison, their voices creating a harmony of confusion and dawning horror. "You should not exist. Nothing like you has ever existed. The warp cannot perceive you. Reality bends around you. You are an impossibility made manifest." Saitama lowered his fist, looking at his knuckles with satisfaction. "That actually felt like something," he said, flexing his hand. "That was a good punch. Not my best, but pretty good." He looked up at the four gods. "Can you do that again? Maybe a bit stronger this time?" The request was devastating in its innocence. He'd just withstood their ultimate combined attack, an assault that had required them to sacrifice the equivalent of entire sectors' worth of accumulated power. And he was asking if they could do it again. But better, they couldn't. The manifestations they'd created, these physical forms in the Eye of Terror, had been fueled by 10,000 years of careful accumulation. Every demon summoned, every soul corrupted, every plague spread, every scheme completed, every battle fought, every excess indulged. All of it had fed their power, and they'd spent nearly all of it on this confrontation. They were still gods, still eternal. But their ability to maintain these physical forms was failing. Already, Khorne's manifestation was beginning to fade, his essence being pulled back to his brass throne in the Imperium. The others were following, their forms becoming translucent, less solid. Saitama watched them fading, and his expression fell. The excitement drained from his face, replaced by the familiar disappointment he'd carried for so long. "You're leaving, but we were just getting started. That last attack was actually pretty good. I thought we were going to have a real fight." "We cannot," Tzeentch admitted, its 9 voices unified in defeat. "To maintain these forms requires power we have expended. To manifest again would require centuries of preparation. You have won." "But I didn't even use my best moves," Saitama protested, his voice carrying a note of genuine sadness. "I wanted to try my consecutive serious punches. I was saving it for when you guys got really serious." The Chaos Gods looked at each other, and through their fading connection shared a single unified thought. If this wasn't him being serious, what would his best moves actually do? They decided they didn't want to know. "Go," Khorne commanded, his voice lacking its usual fury. "Leave our realm. You have proven your point. You are stronger than us. You are an anomaly we cannot corrupt, cannot kill, cannot comprehend. Just go." It was surrender. Absolute, complete surrender. The Chaos Gods, beings that had brought the galaxy to its knees, that had fought the Emperor himself to a standstill, that represented the fundamental darkness of the universe, were surrendering to a bold man in a yellow suit because he was too strong and they were tired of getting punched. Saitama looked at them, looked at his fist, then sighed deeply. "Man, even the gods in this dimension aren't strong enough. Where am I supposed to find a good fight?" And with those words, perhaps the most terrifying sentence ever spoken in the Eye of Terror, he turned and walked back toward where Inquisitor Covenant lay, leaving 4 fading gods in his wake. The arena was collapsing, not in the dramatic way structures usually collapsed, but in the way dreams fade when you wake, gradually becoming less real, less solid, until it was just a memory of a place that had briefly existed. The Chaos Gods were retreating to their respective domains, their manifestations dissipating like smoke in a strong wind. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Eye of Terror was experiencing something approaching peace. Inquisitor Covenant lay where Saitama had left him, his augmented body slowly recovering from the sensory overload of witnessing a battle between gods. His Rosarius had gone dark, its blessed energies completely exhausted. His armor's machine spirit was sending error messages in High Gothic that roughly translated to "I quit." But he was alive, conscious, and more importantly, he had witnessed something that no other servant of the Imperium had ever seen. The Chaos Gods had surrendered. Saitama reached him and crouched down, his expression concerned. "Hey, you okay? You've been lying there pretty still. I was worried those gods might have hurt you with all their weird energy stuff." Covenant tried to speak, but his vocal augmentics needed another moment to reboot. When he finally managed words, they came out as a rasp. "You defeated them, the ruinous powers, the eternal enemies of mankind. You just punched them until they gave up." "Yeah," Saitama said, his tone carrying profound disappointment. "But they weren't as strong as I hoped. I mean, they were stronger than everything else I've fought here, but still not enough to really push me. I didn't even get to use my full strength." He sat down cross-legged on the fading arena floor, looking genuinely dejected. "I thought for sure gods would be the answer, but I guess even gods have limits." Covenant's mind, trained through decades of inquisitorial experience to find threats and heresies, tried to process what this being represented. He wasn't corrupted by chaos. He was completely immune. He wasn't a servant of the Emperor. He didn't even know who the Emperor was. He wasn't a Xenos threat. Scans still registered him as baseline human. He was just strong. Impossibly, inexplicably, absolutely strong. "What will you do now?" Covenant asked, pulling himself into a sitting position with effort. Saitama looked around at the fading Eye of Terror, at the domains of the gods retreating like tides going out. "I guess I'll go back through that portal thing. Maybe find my way home. This dimension has been interesting, but if even the gods here can't give me a challenge, there's not much point in staying." The portal. Covenant's enhanced memory recalled the warp rift that had brought Saitama here. That was a random dimensional anomaly. The chances of it opening again to your home dimension are effectively zero. You may be stranded here. Saitama's face fell further. "Really? That sucks. I had groceries in my fridge." He stood up, brushing off his suit. "Well, I guess I'll figure something out. I usually do." As they spoke, the warp around them continued to settle. Without the god's active manifestation, the Eye of Terror was becoming less immediately hostile, still impossible by material universe standards, but not actively trying to kill everything that existed. In the distance, Covenant could see other figures appearing, demons, but not attacking, just watching. Word had apparently spread through the Imperium about what had happened. A lesser demon, something that looked like a cross between a plague-bearer and a herald of Sinch, probably a being of divided loyalties caught between the two gods, approached cautiously. It kept a respectful distance, then spoke in a voice that bubbled and chittered. "The Four have decreed you are to have safe passage through their realms. We are to guide you back to the material universe. They do not wish to see you again." Saitama brightened slightly. "Oh, that's nice of them. See? Even gods can be reasonable when you talk to them. You punched them until they surrendered," Covenant pointed out. "I mean, yeah, but that's basically how I communicate with strong opponents. It's like a conversation, but with fists." Saitama looked at the demon guide. "Can you take us back to that planet with all the soldiers? Cadia, I think it was called." The demon nodded rapidly, eager to fulfill any request that might make this terrifying being leave faster. Yes, we open rift. You go. Please go." As the demon began scratching symbols in the air, creating a more controlled portal than the chaotic one that had brought them here, Covenant processed what returning to Cadia would mean. He'd left to investigate an anomaly and was returning having witnessed the defeat of the Chaos Gods themselves. His report to the Inquisition would be challenging to write. "Before we go," Covenant said, "I need to understand. What are you, truly? You're not warp-touched. You're not a manifestation of the Emperor's will. You're not a weapon created by the Mechanicus or a lost technology from the Dark Age. What explains your power?" Saitama considered the question seriously. "I'm just a guy who's a hero for fun. I trained really hard. 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats, and a 10-kilometer run every single day for 3 years. It was tough at first, but I kept at it. Eventually, I got strong enough that I could beat anything with one punch." He paused. "I know it sounds simple, but that's really all there is to it. I just worked hard and got results." The explanation was so mundane, so completely at odds with the reality of what Covenant had witnessed, that his mind initially rejected it. But looking at Saitama's earnest expression, he realized the being was being completely honest. There was no grand secret, no ancient artifact, no genetic engineering, just dedication, training, and results that defied every law of reality. It was the most terrifying thing Covenant had ever heard. The idea that simple human determination, carried to its logical extreme, could surpass gods themselves. The portal stabilized, showing a view of Cadia's burning sky. Through it, Covenant could see Kasser Galan's ramparts, could see Commissar Vrost and the 8th Cardian Regiment still holding their positions. The battle for Cadia continued, though reports were coming through the Vox that daemon activity had mysteriously ceased across the entire planet. "Ready?" Saitama asked, offering his hand to help Covenant up. The Inquisitor took it, marveling at the simple human warmth of the grip. This being who just defeated the Chaos Gods was helping him up like a friend helping another friend. There was no condescension, no awareness of the vast gulf in power between them, just simple courtesy. They stepped through the portal together, leaving the Eye of Terror behind. As they crossed the threshold, Covenant looked back and saw something he'd never expected to see. Demons celebrating. Not the usual celebration of corruption or destruction, but genuine relief. They were throwing what looked like a party, happy that the terrifying bald man was leaving. The Chaos Gods had been defeated. The Eye of Terror was celebrating their defeat. The galaxy had just changed in ways that would take centuries to fully understand, and Saitama was already thinking about what to have for dinner. The return to Cadia was jarring in its contrast to the Eye of Terror. One moment, they stood in a realm where reality was negotiable and physics were suggestions. The next, they were back in the material universe where gravity worked consistently, where time flowed in one direction, and where the sky, though filled with smoke and fire, was at least comprehensibly three-dimensional. Commissar Helena Vrost saw them materialize on the ramparts and nearly dropped her bolt pistol for the second time that day. Behind her, the 8th Cadian Regiment stood at attention, their lasguns held ready, but not aimed. They'd learned that pointing weapons at the yellow-suited being was both pointless and potentially embarrassing. "Inquisitor Covenant," Helena said, saluting crisply despite her exhaustion. "You're alive. We'd feared—" She paused, noticing that the Inquisitor looked like he'd aged 10 years in the few hours he'd been gone. His armor was scorched and cracked, his face drawn with fatigue, but his eyes held something new. Not quite hope, but perhaps the absence of a despair he'd carried for so long. "Commissar," Covenant replied, returning the salute with automatic precision. "I need to make a priority astropathic transmission to Terra immediately. The High Lords must know what's happened. The Chaos Gods." He paused, struggling with words that seemed inadequate. "They've been defeated. Temporarily, perhaps not permanently, but definitively." The words rippled through the assembled soldiers like a shockwave. Defeated? The Chaos Gods? The eternal enemies that had plagued mankind for 10 millennia? Several Cadians made the sign of the Aquila, uncertain whether this was heresy to speak or miracle to witness. Saitama, oblivious to the theological crisis he was causing, looked around at the battlefield. In the hours they'd been gone, something remarkable had happened. The demon incursions had stopped. Not retreated, stopped. Warp rifts remained open, but nothing was coming through them. Chaos Space Marines had pulled back to defensive positions, seemingly confused by the sudden absence of warp support. The 13th Black Crusade, which had been on the verge of crushing Cadia, had ground to a halt. "Huh," Saitama observed. "Looks like things calmed down a lot." "That's good. Those soldiers looked really tired." Tech Priest Moravec approached with his mechadendrites twitching in barely controlled agitation. "Yellow suit entity, our Auspex readings are showing unprecedented changes in warp space topology. The Eye of Terror is contracting, slowly but measurably. In the past 3 hours, it has reduced in diameter by approximately 0.003%. "Is that good?" Saitama asked. "It's impossible," Moravec replied, his vocal synthesizer conveying something approaching awe. "The eye has been expanding for 10,000 years. It has never contracted, not once, not even by microscopic amounts. But now, after your confrontation with the ruinous powers, it's shrinking. At current rates, it will take approximately 90,000 years to close completely, but the trend is undeniable." Covenant processed this information alongside everything else he'd witnessed. The implications were staggering. If the eye could contract, if the gods could be forced into retreat, then perhaps the Long War wasn't as eternal as everyone had believed. Perhaps humanity's endless struggle against chaos had a possible endpoint. "I need to know," Helena said, addressing Saitama directly. "What happened in the eye?" The Psychers all reported feeling the warp itself recoil. "Whatever you did shook the Imperium to its foundations." Saitama scratched his head, looking slightly embarrassed. "I fought the gods. They threw some pretty good attacks at me. All 4 of them working together made me use a serious punch, which was cool. But in the end, they got tired and said I should leave. So I did." He shrugged. "Honestly, I was hoping they'd be stronger. Even gods have limits, I guess." The casual way he described defeating the Chaos Gods, with the same tone someone might use to describe an interesting but ultimately disappointing sporting match, was somehow more impressive than any boasting could have been. A Vox unit crackled to life. "This is Battlefleet Cadia. We're detecting massive warp disturbances." Wait, no, correction. we're detecting the absence of warp disturbances. The eye is stable. Demon manifestations across the sector have dropped to near zero. What in the Emperor's name is happening down there? Covenant took the Vox unit. This is Inquisitor Covenant. Prepare astropathic choirs for emergency transmission to Holy Terra. Highest priority. This message must reach the High Lords and the God Emperor's throne room. We have... He paused, choosing his words carefully. We have encountered a being that has fundamentally altered our understanding of the war against chaos. Full details to follow, but know this. The 13th Black Crusade has been stopped. The ruinous powers have been driven back. Cadia still stands. Cadia stands, Helena repeated, her voice carrying the weight of her world's ancient motto. Around her, the 8th Cadian Regiment took up the chant. Cadia stands, Cadia stands. The chant spread across the fortress walls, carried from soldier to soldier, unit to unit. Men and women who'd been fighting for days without rest, who'd watched their comrades fall to demon claws and corrupted blades, who'd held the line because that was what Cadians did. They all joined the chant, not in celebration of victory, but in affirmation of survival. They had stood, their world had stood. Against impossible odds, they remained. Saitama watched the soldiers chanting and smiled slightly. That's pretty cool. They seem really dedicated to protecting their planet. He turned to Covenant. So, what happens now? Do I just hang around here? I still don't really know how to get home. Covenant considered the question carefully. The Imperium's first instinct would be to weaponize this being, to point him at every threat humanity faced and let him solve problems with his fists. But looking at Saitama's simple, earnest expression, the Inquisitor realized that approach would fail spectacularly. This wasn't a weapon to be wielded. This was a person who'd stumbled into their universe by accident and just wanted to find a good fight. The Mechanicus might be able to help, Covenant offered. They have archives dating back to the dark age of technology. If dimensional rifts are possible, they might know how to create one deliberately. It would take time, research. But dimensional rifts? A new voice interrupted. Everyone turned to see a massive figure emerging from a Thunderhawk gunship that had just landed. The figure was over 7 feet tall, clad in power armor of deep blue, with a winged sword emblazoned on the shoulder pad. A space marine of the Ultramarines chapter, his helmet maglocked to his belt, revealing a weathered face that spoke of centuries of warfare. I am Sergeant Ventress of the Ultramarines 4th Company, the Space Marine announced. We've been monitoring the situation on Cadia and were prepared to make planetfall when the demon incursions suddenly ceased. I've been authorized by Captain Sicarius to investigate. His gaze fell on Saitama. And you would be the anomaly that's caused such disruption. Saitama looked up at the Space Marine, one of humanity's legendary defenders, a genetically enhanced warrior who devoted centuries to protecting the Imperium, and said, "Are you strong?" Ventress blinked, taken aback by the blunt question. I am an Adeptus Astartes. I have fought in the Emperor's name for 140 years. I have faced orcs, tyrannids, traitors, and heretics. I am... Yes, compared to most humans, I am strong. Wanna fight? Saitama asked, hopefully. Absolutely not, Covenant interjected quickly, stepping between them. Sergeant Ventress, the being you see before you has just defeated 4 Chaos Gods in single combat. Engaging him in a sparring match would be inadvisable. Ventress's expression cycled through disbelief, analysis, and finally a sort of resigned acceptance that this day had already been too strange for skepticism. Defeated the Chaos Gods. Of course, because why not? He looked at Covenant. Inquisitor, I'll need a full report. The chapter master will want to know everything about this development, as will the High Lords, the Fabricator General, the Master of the Astronomicon, and probably every other major authority in the Imperium, Covenant replied. The galaxy just changed, Sergeant. We simply don't know how yet. Saitama, realizing that the conversation was moving into politics and administration, topics he found even more boring than weak enemies, started to wander off toward the edge of the ramparts. He looked out over Cadia's scarred landscape, at the fortress cities still standing despite the siege, at the soldiers maintaining their positions even in exhaustion. "Hey," he called back to the assembled group. "If I'm going to be stuck here for a while, is there anything I can do to help? I mean, I'm a hero. Heroes help people. That's kind of the whole point." The question hung in the air, full of terrifying possibility. What could someone who defeated the Chaos Gods do to help the Imperium? The list was potentially endless. But looking at his earnest expression, his genuine desire to be useful, Covenant found himself smiling despite everything. "I'm sure we'll think of something," the Inquisitor said. "After all, the galaxy is a dangerous place. I'm certain we can find challenges worthy of your attention." Saitama's face brightened. "Really? That'd be great. Maybe this universe will have stronger enemies than the gods. There's got to be someone out there who can make me actually try, right?" Somewhere in the galaxy, the Tyranid hive fleets continued their remorseless advance. In the webway, the ancient Eldar whispered prophecies about a void in fate. In the depths of Mars, the Fabricator General received troubling reports about an anomaly that the Omnissiah's calculations couldn't account for. And on distant Makrage, Robot Gilliman, the returned Primarch, felt a disturbance in the warp that suggested the Great Game had fundamentally changed. The 41st millennium had just gotten considerably more interesting, and Saitama was just getting started. The days following what would come to be called the Humbling passed in a strange mixture of normalcy and unprecedented change. The 13th Black Crusade stalled completely as Chaos forces withdrew in confusion, their demonic support simply vanishing. Abaddon, the Despoiler's grand fleet, retreated to the Eye of Terror, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the War Master issued no new proclamations, made no new threats. The silence from Chaos was more unnerving to some than their loudest war cries had ever been. Cadia stood, battered, bloodied, but standing. The fortress world that had guarded the Cadian Gate for millennia remained defiant, and its defenders knew they'd witnessed something that would be spoken of for generations. Not a victory earned through superior tactics or blessed intervention, but salvation delivered by a bold man in a yellow suit who'd simply been too strong for even gods to handle. Inquisitor Covenant spent those days composing his report, each word chosen with excruciating care. How did one tell the High Lords of Terra that humanity's eternal enemies had been casually defeated by an entity that claimed his power came from exercise? How did one explain that the warp itself had recoiled from a being who had no connection to it whatsoever? In the end, he settled for clinical precision, documenting what he'd seen, what he'd measured, what the machine spirits had recorded. Let others debate the implications. He would simply provide the truth. Tech priest Moravec became obsessed with understanding the dimensional rift that had brought Saitama to their universe. If it could be replicated, controlled, perhaps even reversed, it would represent a technological breakthrough unseen since the Dark Age. But every calculation failed, every theory collapsed under scrutiny. Saitama existed in defiance of understood physics, and whatever had brought him here operated on principles the Mechanicus couldn't begin to fathom. As for Saitama himself, he spent his time helping with reconstruction efforts. Without fanfare or expectation of reward, he moved rubble that would have required heavy machinery, cleared debris from collapsed bunkers, and rescued survivors trapped in places no normal human could reach. The Cadians, initially unsure how to treat this being who'd humbled gods, gradually accepted him as simply another soldier doing his duty. They taught him the words to their marching songs, shared their rations during mealtimes, and answered his endless questions about the Imperium with patient good humor. He fit in somehow. This being of impossible power, this anomaly that shouldn't exist, found a place among ordinary soldiers defending their world. But the galaxy was watching. Reports filtered in from across Imperial space. Eldar Farseers spoke of a new skein in fate, a thread that didn't belong to the weave. The Tyrannid hive mind paused its advance in one sector, its vast consciousness processing the existence of something that registered as neither biomass, nor threat, nor anything its genetic memory could classify. Orc war bosses across a dozen systems simultaneously declared they'd found the biggest fight in the galaxy, though none could explain what that fight was or where to find it. And in the Golden Throne Room on Terra, the God Emperor of mankind, that ancient being locked in eternal stasis, stirred in ways his attendants hadn't seen in millennia. The Astronomicon, that psychic beacon he maintained to guide humanity through the warp, flickered with what might have been curiosity, or perhaps recognition. Even after 10,000 years of silence, the master of mankind could sense when something fundamental had changed. On Cadia, as another sunset painted the scarred sky in shades of orange and red, Saitama stood on the ramparts with Commissar Vrost. They watched the reconstruction efforts in comfortable silence, two soldiers sharing the satisfaction of a day's work done. "Do you miss your home?" Helena asked eventually. "Yeah," Saitama admitted. "It was boring, but it was my boring. I knew where everything was, had my favorite grocery store. My apartment was small, but it was mine." He paused. "But I guess if I'm stuck here, this universe seems okay. Lots of fighting, but people trying to protect each other too. That's what heroes do, right? Protect people." "That's what we try to do," Helena agreed. "Though we don't always succeed. The galaxy is vast, and the threats are endless. Sometimes it feels like we're just holding back the darkness one more day." "One more day is pretty good," Saitama said simply. "If everyone holds back the darkness for one more day, eventually you get a lot of days. That's not nothing." The profound simplicity of the statement settled between them. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, where hope was rationed and victory measured in acceptable losses, here was someone who believed that trying was enough, that holding the line mattered, that each day humanity survived was a victory worth celebrating. Perhaps that was his real power, Helena thought. Not the impossible strength or the immunity to chaos, but the fundamental, unshakable belief that being a hero meant something, that protecting people was worth doing even if the threat never ended, that you kept fighting not because you'd win, but because it was the right thing to do. In the Eye of Terror, the Chaos Gods nursed their wounds and schemed new schemes, but cautiously now, always aware that somewhere in the galaxy existed something they couldn't corrupt or kill. In the Webway, the Eldar updated their prophecies, adding new verses about the void that walks and the punch that echoes. In the depths of space, ancient evils that had slumbered for eons stirred, sensing a new player in the eternal game. The great game continued, as it always had and always would. But now there was a wild card in the deck, a being who didn't play by the rules because he didn't know the rules existed, a hero who'd stumbled into the grimdark future and decided that, strong or not, he'd do what heroes do. He'd help. And in a galaxy where the endless war consumed trillions, where hope was heresy and survival was victory, maybe that simple act of helping, of being a hero because that's what you did, was the most revolutionary thing of all. The Emperor's light burns eternal across the Imperium, but on one scarred fortress world, under a smoke-filled sky, it had been joined by something else. Not divine light or ancient power, but the simple, inextinguishable flame of someone who'd decided to be a hero, no matter what universe tried to break him. And somewhere, in whatever home dimension he'd left behind, a grocery store clerk was very confused about the carton of eggs that had been left at the checkout counter 3 days ago with a note that just said, "Back soon, Saitama." The galaxy would never be quite the same. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was exactly what it needed.